suffit. لحظات قليلة ريثما تأخذ التلفزيون الوطني بعض الصور ونبدأ بحول الله إن شاء الله. Quelques instants courts, le temps que la télévision nationale prenne quelques images, plan de coupe, et on commence. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا. تتشرف بلادنا باستضافة هذا المؤتمر عالي المستوى الذي يضم ممثلين عن الحكومات وهيئات التمويل والمنظمات، ويسعدنا الترحيب بكم في جلسات وفي فعاليات هذا المؤتمر الذي ستتمحور نقاشاته حول تسريع تمويل مشاريع الهيدروجين. وبعد الجلسة الافتتاحية ستتابعون جلسات متخصصة لتعميق النقاشات حول الموضوع، ويوجد البرنامج في الملف الذي يوجد أمامكم على الطاولة. وستتخلل فعاليات هذا المؤتمر استراحات قهوة مخصصة للوفود الأجنبية. Mesdames et messieurs, bienvenue à ce forum. La Mauritanie est honorée par accueillir ce forum de haut niveau qui regroupe des représentants du gouvernement, des institutions de financement, des organisations dans le domaine de l'hydrogène. Les discussions vont se focaliser sur les mécanismes et les meilleures options pour accélérer le financement des projets d'hydrogène vert. Et à l'issue de la session inaugurale, la session d'ouverture, vous allez suivre des panels spécialisés pour approfondir les sujets. يسعدني الترحيب بالسيد جوناس رئيس منظمة الهيدروجين الأخضر الذي سيتولى إدارة الجلسة الافتتاحية والجلسة التي بعدها. ودون الإطالة أدعو السيد جوناس. Nous accueillons M. Jonas, président de l'organisation de l'hydrogène vert, qui va diriger les sessions, notamment la session inaugurale et la session qui suit. Et à vous la parole, M. Jonas. Merci beaucoup. Avant cela, on suit une vidéo, courte vidéo d'annonce et une deuxième de promotion pour donner un aperçu très résumé de ce secteur de l'hydrogène en Mauritanie. Merci. تتابعون فيديو قصير حول إمكانات موريتانيا في مجال الطاقات المتجددة ومجال الهيدروجين، وبعد ذلك ستتواصل فعاليات المؤتمر مع السيد جوناس. لا فيديو. Merci, M. Jonas. Maybe the English version. Monsieur Jonas. Merci. شكرا.
Merci, monsieur. Do you want that? No. Okay. Excellencies, ministers, Minister Saleh, friends, Mubarak Ramadan, hello. All protocols observed, as one say in some neighboring countries. It really is absolutely wonderful to be here among so many friends. I was saying a little bit earlier today, Minister Saleh and I met at COP27, and you suggested then that we should organize a meeting here on this topic. And here we are. You and your team delivered. And we are, and I want to really stress this from the outset, incredibly grateful to be hosted by you and your government and your ministerial colleagues, and in particular your colleagues, Krumbale, Ismail, Ahmed Val, and the whole team for having put this together. It's not an easy time to put it together, and it has been a great partnership. We're very grateful to our hosts, but let's also recognize that we've got many countries here, not least coming together within the Africa Green Hydrogen Alliance, which the African Development Bank and others have helped to champion, and the UN high-level champion, and we've got Jabri from the champion's office here as well. And we've got colleagues here from a number of African countries, from Egypt, in Ahmed and Mohammed Hafez, I think are here, from Ethiopia, Abira Endeho, forgive my way of pronouncing your names, friends, from Kenya, Yusuf, from Morocco, Ayub Hurt, from Niger, I think we've got Bala, Marman Rabiou here, from Nigeria, we've got some colleagues in Yubon, Abiola Ave, and Ekpa Efyon, from Senegal, Issa Dion, and from Zambia, Crescivia Hishikumba, I think is more or less correct. Forgive me for not pronouncing your names correctly. I do apologize if I missed anyone, but we do really want to highlight you in particular. We have some outsized projects, and I think the video made that totally clear. These numbers are not just sort of any numbers, they are enormous numbers. They are almost unimaginable numbers. And we are particularly grateful for the companies that were identified in that video. From BP, we have colleagues from Chariot, CWP, and Total Eren. All of your support is also much appreciated. These days, today and tomorrow, we're going to talk particularly about the role of development finance institutions. And we are also incredibly grateful for this meeting being a collaboration between the government, us, these other partners, the World Bank, including the IFC, and the European Investment Bank. Lastly, my colleagues and I, Ines, Tove, and Joyce, I can't see her, we come from a small foundation, a small not-profit, whose mission it is to make this happen faster. Whose mission it is to make this happen faster, responsibly. And we could not do this unless we got support from a number of foundations and organizations, but also private companies. And we're very grateful to some of those that are here today, including again CWP, Fortescue, and ThyssenKrupp, whose board member, board advisor on green hydrogen, Stefan Kaufmann, is here somewhere as well. We're grateful to all of you. The numbers for Mauritania, as we saw in the video, are enormous. Maybe 100 billions or more in announced projects. And we know it is a big country. We know that it is twice the size of France. How many times have we not heard that? But we equally know that it's a country that has a small economy. And this is important, and it is important for this context. Because actually, today's meeting is not so much about financing as about de-risking. So the question is, can we de-risk to the point that we can make these outsized projects happen here and in neighboring countries? And the answer is yes, we can. The question is whether we have the will to do it. And I think we know the answer to that question too. And that is, we probably don't have sufficient will today, yet. But that will is growing, and it will continue to grow. That will and effort to de-risk will grow because we don't have a choice. The world is heading, as we all know, towards a climate emergency. And for every heat wave, for every drought, for every flood, for every frightening humanly caused climate abnormality, that will to de-risk will increase and go up and will make the numbers start working better. To the governments, the Mauritanian friends, and all of you here, we have one in particular message to make, and that is we must do whatever we can to keep it stable, to strike agreements across the political divide, to build confidence. And a lot of that here and in many of the neighboring countries, we can do it by learning from the extractive industries. We also need to build confidence with communities. We need to build trust by being open and demonstrate long-term development efforts. And with investors, again, build trust by being open and indeed predictable. If the governments can do these things, the private sector can build the stuff, and the development community, the DFIs, people like us, can do whatever to support and enable that building of stuff. To the companies, I have the following to say. Yes, we must with urgency make it work, move fast to investment decisions. But we will only get there by doing it properly, by taking communities seriously, and by following high international standards. And to everyone, we have one key lesson from a post-Second World War litany of failures in the oil, gas, and mining sectors to draw. Well, maybe not so much to draw, not to tell you, but a lesson that we should simply remind ourselves, because I think it is clear. And that is, governments try not to be greedy in the short term, and companies try not to be greedy, if you like, in the longer term. What do I mean by that? You see, a solid and stable investment climate to everyone's benefit lies in the governments being patient, in powerful companies not trying to be too clever, thinking that they can give some now, knowing that they will have a free ride tomorrow. I think there's some interesting lessons here from Norway, arguably one of the world's most successful governments when it comes to extraction. The government there learned early to be patient. It even pays the big companies to explore. But if the companies strike, the government makes sure it gets its fair share. I think there is a pertinent, hugely relevant lesson here for the development finance institutions. The development cost of a 10 billion project may not be high in relative terms, but it may still be a mere 100 million until a final investment decision or more. A final investment decision that is years away. And of course, 100 million is also a huge amount of money. Huge amount of money most of our governments can't pay for. The developers should pay for much of it, but even big developers will struggle. So DFIs, all of us, I hope that during today's meeting, one of the many practical, concrete questions we will discuss and debate and consider is how we fund those early development years. Lastly, on Saturday, we will have a weird meeting across the lawn from the White House in Washington, D.C., in the margins of the World Bank and IMF spring meetings. Lots of DFIs will meet, and we will have a meeting with our chairman, Malcolm Turnbull, and a number of senior representatives from many banks and developers and others. And that meeting will begin with Minister Saleh's colleague, Usman Mamadou Kane, the Minister of Economic Affairs, delivering the Nouakchott message. You see, there is a process under which can be summarized in that the World Bank and other DFIs commit to reforms and greater focus on financing the energy transition, in return for more funds from shareholders and governments. And with the Nouakchott message, we hope to tell them all what that funding means when it comes to large-scale renewable and the green hydrogen economy. So today and tomorrow, we need to help Minister Saleh and his team to figure out the content of that Nouakchott message. We hope that message will give clarity, drive change, and create a process for how DFIs contribute to the financing of large-scale renewable energy and the green hydrogen economy. In preparing for this meeting and for the Nouakchott message, I said at the outset that we're looking for numbers. What does a big financial investment decision look like? And in what way does it involve DFIs? We wrote this report that I hope you've all been given that looks like this, Getting the Right Blend. And we were looking for numbers on what does that financial investment decision actually, as I said, look at. But we didn't find that many numbers. But we found a hugely successful numbers guy who said to us all, by all means, try to find an offtake agreement, a customer who's prepared to commit to a price he or she will pay. But it's not going to be enough. For this reason, you have to de-risk by going long-term, by collaborating, by working together. These large projects will require collaboration and the involvement of all of us. And they're likely to involve all of us in many different aspects: ownership, customer, provider of finance, collaborating. There will be new forms of vertical involvement, if you like. So what we did was, we found a numbers guy who told us not look for numbers, but for partnerships and trust. And that is, of course, what we are hoping to work with you all here today. That's what I wanted to open with, and we now have a panel of things up a little bit. We could just swap over here, and Philippe is in charge of Vice President of Hydrogen and Carbon Storage at BP. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. Your Excellency, Abdesalam Old Mohammed Saleh, Minister of Petroleum, Mines and Energy, colleagues and government officials from the region, distinguished guests and colleagues from the hydrogen industry, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here in Nouakchott and an honor to be part of the panel opening the first African Green Hydrogen Finance Accelerator Forum. BP has a long-standing history of partnering with African governments to unlock the continent's oil and gas resources. That's energy that has fueled and continues to fuel today African economies. Hydrocarbons that are needed today and will be needed for decades to come. And whilst we continue to invest in hydrocarbons, we're also seeking ways to help people and businesses transition to lower carbon sooner. We're planning on investing at scale in lower carbon energies like green hydrogen. Here in Mauritania, precisely, we have a good example of how to do both. Right now, we're working with the governments of Mauritania and Senegal to develop the Greater Tortue Ahmeyim project, one of the most innovative liquefied natural gas projects in the world. And alongside this, we're also exploring the potential for large-scale green hydrogen production in country. Why is BP determined to help bring low-carbon hydrogen to the world? We believe that it has a vital role to play in the energy system, essential to decarbonizing hard-to-abate industries and heavy transport. So much that low-carbon hydrogen could have up to a 10% share of the primary energy market by the year 2050. That's a massive potential, and Africa could play a leading role. Why do I say that? To develop successful green hydrogen projects, you need renewable energy to power electrolyzers, and Africa has many locations with abundant wind and solar energy. You also need deep energy project management experience to develop projects safely and efficiently, and this is where BP can help. For over 100 years, we have been one of the world's largest energy businesses, and we have decades of experience safely operating large-scale gray hydrogen plants. We have a world-class trading and shipping business giving us leverage to develop global-scale hydrogen export hubs and seek markets for the export products. That means we can make and move green hydrogen to where it is needed in the world. And we have a track record of success and strong and trusted relationships in a number of African countries. Mauritania is a prime example of this. Like any new industry, of course, challenges remain and need to be overcome. Green hydrogen, in particular, will need supportive policies to nurture its growth and encourage investment. Over time, green hydrogen will become more competitive, but policy support will be required to develop the market and ensure it reaches its full potential. We have seen this in the renewable energy sector in the last 2 decades. And it will be worth it, because as well as providing a reliable source of low-carbon energy, the development of the green hydrogen industry will also create opportunities for local people. And this is again where BP can help. We will look for opportunities to source locally, where practical, and we're constantly striving to support building supplier capability. The Greater Tortue Ahmeyim project is a good example of that. It has generated more than 3,000 local jobs, and over 350 local companies are engaged with its development across Mauritania and Senegal. That's part of our commitment to Africa and to Mauritania today. We look forward to many more years of partnering with governments to help develop the secure, affordable, lower carbon energy the world needs. The energy trilemma, as we call it. Green hydrogen is essential to that ambition, and this continent is well placed to make it happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philippe. Let's raise your head straight away maybe to Adonis Rollis from Charlotte.
Good morning, Your Excellency, Mr. Saleh, distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, and representatives of various governments, the diplomatic community, my business partners, and various NGOs. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for inviting us to this great event. I want to thank the Ministry in particular, the African Green Hydrogen Alliance, the World Bank, the Green Hydrogen Organization for hosting us, and Jonas, a special thanks to you and your colleagues for organizing this event. We're very excited to be here and to share with you some of our collective African experiences. Chariots is an energy company that really has 3 pillars to its business. We have a gas business, a natural gas business where we're developing Morocco's first offshore gas development. We have a second business, which is a renewable energy business in partnership with Total Eren. And on behalf of our partners, Total Eren, I just want to acknowledge them, they're here in the audience with us. We work together on renewables across the continent, supplying solutions to the mining industry, allowing them to really move into greener energy, which is cheaper and more reliable. And the third part of our business is what we're here for today, which is green hydrogen and Project Noor, which we're in partnership with Total, as I say. Chariot is an African company, and we have a long history in Mauritania, both in the mining space and in the traditional oil and gas exploration. So I suspect many of us are going to say the same message here today, because the facts around green hydrogen are pretty much the same for all of us. But gigascale projects, green hydrogen projects such as Project Noor, have the size and potential to move the needle for the GDP of countries and societies at large. These projects can deliver country value enormously in line with broader economic development plans and help establish these host countries as attractive business destinations for further investment. By responsibly developing large green hydrogen projects, we can stimulate the country's growth with massive local content, local beneficiation, local value add, which ultimately leads to employment and at the end, incredible wealth creation. And as these projects are so large, Mauritania has the opportunity now to also be a key partner for the main hydrogen centers around the world, including Europe, North America, and the Far East, by not only serving its own needs as far as hydrogen goes, but also exporting various hydrogen derivative products. Unlocking is the key word. Unlocking this transformative potential requires unlocking investments on an almost unprecedented scale, as we heard earlier, especially when you compare the size of these gigascale projects to other investments, primary industries like mining. As we know, green hydrogen remains a nascent industry, still perceived as risky, as a risky investment because of its high costs and various regulatory, technical, offtake, and financial risks. Developing the green hydrogen market will require diversifying sources of financing and risk sharing amongst the different actors. As we heard, cost of capital remains one of the key drivers in achieving project economics and is driven by specific country risks. Global markets for green hydrogen will be extremely competitive, and Africa will find itself competing with regions such as the Middle East, where the cost of capital is much lower. We're all aware of the Saudi Arabian project, where the cost of capital, if it's not zero, it's just above zero. And that's what we have to compete with. And this will therefore require a partnerships approach, where we as developers work together with governments, development partners, civil society, and our colleagues from the private sector. And this is especially the case, as Jonas said, to de-risk those initial phases of development. Now, if we are to take the challenge of reaching carbon net zero by 2050 and having to produce almost 800 million tons of green hydrogen, carbon net zero will never happen without hydrogen and green hydrogen being a central component of the new world energy mix. It just doesn't happen with hydrogen's involvement, without hydrogen's involvement. This is a huge challenge, and financing these projects, as I said, will be a global undertaking. I read recently in the Financial Times that someone called for a type of Marshall Plan when addressing the epic problem of climate change, and we will need a Marshall-type plan to kickstart the green hydrogen economy. We will need to find cheaper capital in order to invest these many hundreds of billions of dollars, and we're going to need innovation on all fronts. But as we know, when the human spirit decides to do something, there is nothing that we cannot achieve. And we at Chariot, Minister and esteemed guests, with our partners Total Eren, are ready to take up this challenge. And we believe that all of us sitting here in this forum, all the partners here, we're at the forefront of shaping a new energy world. Thank you.
Thank you, that was excellent. Before we hear from the last company, from Rami Lofty and CWP, then of course we're going to hear from Minister Saleh sort of framing all of this. But before that, I just want to give the three company representatives a challenge to think about. I wonder if, before the Minister, you could, we'll come back to it, just give us one sentence each on where your project is at, what it is, what's happening with it, and if there are any particular challenges you see. So come back to that in 5 minutes. Before that, Rami, you've been waiting for a long time. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Minister Saleh, Your Excellency, thank you very much for having us here. It's a real honor to be in Mauritania. I've spent a lot of time in my early career in Nouakchott, so it's a very close place to my heart personally. But time runs very quickly. I came here into the new airport. Last time I came here, I was in the old airport. And it's a massive change. It's amazing what the country have achieved in the last 10 years. Really, really impressive. And, you know, unfortunately it shows that time runs very quickly and it shows my age a little bit. But the last time I've been here was more than 12 years ago. Personally, I've joined CWP in December of last year. And I've joined CWP because of the massive ambition that we have as a company. And from my perspective, I understand that we came in 2019, we spoke to Minister Saleh about the idea of developing massive scale green hydrogen projects in Mauritania. And we've done that in a number of areas. So we've identified that where there is the potential to develop large-scale power projects in areas that are normally not connected to a grid, so have, you know, I think that the presentation or the video that was posted by the Mauritanian government is actually spot on. And Mauritania for us ticked all the boxes. So we came here, we spoke to the minister, and the minister immediately bought into our ideas. And that was at a time where people were literally, you know, walking us out of the room and saying, you guys are dreaming. So it's amazing to be here, see all the players that are in the room, and recognize the massive advantage and advancement that happened over the last 3 years. Thanks to Jonas and the Green Hydrogen Organization in delivering on basically the idea that was initialed in the COP27. This gathering is the second gathering of the African Green Hydrogen Alliance, with the spread of events and are confirmed from 3 things. There is now a critical mass of African governments, project developers, and international supporters who see and are willing to pursue the enormous potential of Africa to turn into the world-leading renewable power into a major energy source for the green industrialization and contribution to achieving the global net zero emissions by 2050. It also made very clear by the numerous exciting announcements, for example, made in Egypt, Kenya, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Namibia, and of course, Mauritania as well. We're seeing the green hydrogen train is actually moving across the continent. We need to not look only at the big energy generation numbers and project costs, but what these projects could mean for macro and socio-economic development on the continent. Also, I always say that it's really unfair to call these projects as hydrogen projects. These are really going to be ecosystems in their own right. These will create affordable power, fresh water, infrastructure, industrialization, all at massive scales in areas that are today deprived from all of that. So it will really change the positive outlook for the countries that we're working in. Mauritania's star is rising, in particular, as a leading within the Africa accelerating an emergence of the new global green hydrogen industry. Why is that? I mean, I've mentioned that before, but it's blessed with some of the world's best and most complementary wind and solar in wide open space. Its co-location with high-grade iron ore basin, which creates a massive potential with regards to the green steel industry in particular, that's already in production, but great opportunity to expand that remains. There is access to upgradable ports along major international shipping routes. We've seen the proximity to Europe and to international markets as well. And all of the above led to 4 major green hydrogen projects now being proposed and more than 100 gigawatt of new renewable energy capacity now being possible. I think that there is a window of opportunity now. The momentum is behind us, but we need to massively raise the ambition if we are to achieve and seize this opportunity. These windows come and go, and they don't stay forever. And I think with the momentum and the coalition of people that are here in the room, it's our opportunity to seize that now. We obviously welcome the very clever first steps by the Mauritanian government and by His Excellency Minister Salah this week to coordinate the stakeholders and to identify the infrastructure and national assets needs to support a new green hydrogen industry. Some needs are common, others would be project-specific, but we all need to share a common vision to make this work quickly, and it's all about our partnerships. This simply won't happen without the financial heft and support of the MBDs, the multilaterals, and bilateral partners as well. See this not only as a cost, but actually as an investor in the future of Africa. Investment in infrastructure, enabling infrastructure, is key and is not going to tick all the project financing boxes. As one example, our own socio-economic study on the likely impact of Project Amman have showed that it could enhance the Mauritanian GDP by 2030 of up to 40 to 50%, and in the coming decade by 2035 by up to 50 to 60%. It could also reduce unemployment by 1/3 within 15 years, significantly increase the labor skills and educational opportunities, and underpin universal electrification and zero-emission transport. And importantly, also create huge potential for local players. Local content is absolutely key. This would be an onshore project. Require significant amount of infrastructure and cannot simply happen without having the right local players, not only from a labor force, but also from companies that are able to contribute to both the operations and the construction phases of this project. Now, here in Mauritania, just to address some of Jonas's points, where are we on our Mauritanian project? We have the first mover advantage, so we've got, in terms of time at least, and we wanted to make sure that we seize that opportunity on time. We don't take this lightly, and we're not complacent about the fact that we were the first to sign the MOU with the Mauritanian government back in 2019. So what are we doing? We're progressing our global convention discussions with the government of Mauritania under the umbrella of the Hydrogen Code.
that will be implemented in the coming month. We're very excited by the potential, and we're very also positive about our engagements with the government and their external advisors. So making some real strides towards getting the global convention agreed, and we find ourselves in a place where this is really the first agreement that that would be signed on the continent. So we really take this responsibility in terms of approaching exactly the principles that Jonas was mentioning earlier, which is the sharing of that benefit between the government and the private sector players in a way where there is a balance between enabling the project up front but sharing the value that will be created in the longer term. This is absolutely key for us. The other element is, whilst we're doing that, we're also progressing in the technical aspects of the project. We have submitted our terms of reference for the SIA already to the government of Mauritania with regards to the 30 gigawatt power generation potential. We have done our on-the-ground surveys and site investigations for more than 50% of the area, and we're progressing our pre-FEED studies and project definition in a way that allows us to define the first phase of our project, which is likely to be a sized shrunk pipe, basically, in terms of being able to deliver FID by the middle of this decade and being able to deliver first production before 2030. Finally, I'll leave you with two messages. The first message is that we are in the business of delivering the lowest and most attractive cost of power on the planet. And I think our project in Mauritania is absolutely well positioned to deliver that. And what that would allow us to do is not only produce hydrogen, but it's to support the massive industrialization potential. That means green ammonia, that means green steel, and other industries as well that would benefit from the existence of our project. And also the final message is that our train has left the station, but we need all the players. When I say all the players, that's the governments, the DFIs, off-takers, the OEM players, the private sector developers, to work together in order to accelerate this journey and ensure that it doesn't stall. Thank you very much.
Gigawatt, we need to be realistic around what is the first phase for the project. And that's exactly what we're working on. And it actually corresponds exactly to the conversation that needs to happen here. Because if you think about the ultimate size of the first phase is basically trying to find the balance between capturing the economies of scale that would allow us to deliver the lowest cost power that would then create the commercial platform for green hydrogen production, green ammonia production, and the participation into the green steel industry, whilst at the same time making sure that that happens in a way where there is sufficient funding that would be available for that from the DFI players, from the commercial banks, but also it fits within the available infrastructure. we see the enabling infrastructure as the key element that would allow us to bridge the gap. So if the enabling infrastructure is going to be there, if we have the availability of a port to import the materials, if we have the availability of roads to basically transport the equipment to site, then this would allow us to solve the issue in a much more commercially oriented way that would allow us then to achieve our production targets. So enabling infrastructure is key, and I think that's where the DFI is. In terms of what we are doing, we're working on 3 vectors. So the first vector that we're working on is basically the site measurements, the site surveys, understanding the environmental impact assessment, designing exactly the spacing of our turbines, designing the spacing of our solar panels, and also designing the exact locations for the export terminals. We're working with the government on that very closely. The second element that we are working on is we're investing a lot of time and a lot of intellectual resource into the optimization of what we call the nodes for our delivery of green hydrogen. So we see basically that the benefit of having, being in an area that does not have connection to the grid is that we can create closed loop systems that would allow us to design the turbines. We're working very closely with OEMs to have custom-made designs for the turbines, custom-made designs for the solar panels that would maximize the efficiency of the dedicated transmission lines that would allow us then to deliver the lowest cost power, as I mentioned. And finally, the offtake. So we're working on 2 key vectors at the moment. We're working on green ammonia, and we're also working very closely with the iron ore industry with regards to the green steel as well.
Excellent, thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you once again, Rami. Thank you. Can we very quickly, we're a bit late, but Philip, if I could ask you to maybe come and join me here and give a very quick one. So here we have BP. Tell us a little bit about what is behind this number.
Thank you. The story's a bit similar actually to the CWP, although obviously we're running probably, I'd say, a year behind in terms of where they're at in progress. But so we have now LiDAR and pyrometer equipment in country. We're going to start taking data, wind speeds, etc., in the areas that were part of the MOU that we signed with the government last year. That will help us inform through this year, similar to the points made by CWP, how do we best optimize the location of turbines and actually the generation of renewable energy within the areas that we've been allocated. The intention with that will be also to bring MetMass later in the year, progress the discussion with the government to start defining what could be an initial concept for probably 3 phases to these 30 gigawatt. Typically what we do, and by the way, BP has similar projects to the ones we have in Mauritania, at least in 5 locations around the world, from Australia, Middle East, etc. So we're already starting to develop blueprints of how these projects can be developed. And how can you actually standardize the approach? Although they're large scale, trying to have standardized approach so that we will generate efficiencies of scale as we launch the construction of these. So towards the end of the year, we'll have a clear idea of what are the type of modules that we could create around circa 10 gigawatts of renewable power, 5 gigawatts of electrolysis is the typical scale that we look at. We're also leveraging the fact that we have very active presence in country looking at ports and logistics. We've conducted about 50% of the geotech work in the areas that we have, so that will continue to progress. We're doing desktop environmental studies at this point in time, but we'll do field work between now and the end of the year as well. So all that information will come into place for us to start developing a more detailed concept by the end of the year of where we want to locate, what ports we leverage based on the experience we have on the ground, and then progress the project on that basis.
Excellent. Just one very quick question. It says BP here. Can you say anything about other companies involved, or is it kind of solo play here?
Thank you. At this stage, this is 100% BP, but like CWP and others, we serve a substantial part of the steel industry around the world where we supply natural gas today. Many of these companies are talking to us to explore green hydrogen solutions from Australia, Middle East, Europe. A number of these companies are talking to us, as well as off-takers in Asia in particular, that may have an interest to come in with an equity participation. So this is something we're open to. We believe these type of partnerships between developers, companies that can execute the projects, and companies that can actually act as off-takers and co-investors could be quite powerful. It is our experience from the LNG industry 25, 30 years ago when we started the LNG industry, which by the way was very incipient at that point in time. We saw a similar dynamic where you have some of the off-takers come in, co-invest in the projects with long-term off-take arrangements. So that may be part of the solution here.
That's great. Thank you so much, Philip. And lastly, Adonis from Chariot.
Thank you, Jonas. Yeah, so as far as Chariot and Total Eren goes in Project Noor, I mean, we've got these big numbers, 30, 15, 10 gigawatts. I mean, it's like saying, how many jumbo jets do you have? These are huge numbers. I suspect that there's capacity to go bigger than that if need be. But just to keep it real and to keep CapEx numbers real, we speak about 10 gigawatts. What we've done is completed a pre-feasibility study. We're moving into a definitive feasibility study, which entails all the work that goes into a definitive feasibility study, going into detail on wind, solar, ESIA, we're doing the LiDAR, we're doing all the wind measurements, that all is happening in the near term. Much like CWP, we hope to be in production before 2030 as well. And I think having Total Eren as a partner is great because when it comes to renewable energy, wind and solar, they've done it all, right? And we don't see that as a big risk. I think what we all industry players face is there's certain technological challenges in green hydrogen that we still have to work through. And we'll get there, one of them being electrolyzers. What's the makeup of electrolyzers for such big volumes of hydrogen? How are we going to get there? But I think the key thing here is collaboration. I think all of us here are going to need to work together, some form on some things of shared infrastructure where the government will play a significant role in guiding us, I hope. But we're going to lean on each other, I think, these three big projects in the next couple of years. Thanks very much.
Thank you, that's great. And I guess not least on the infrastructure side. Just lastly, as Adnan said, these are enormous numbers. As a rule of thumb, you often talk about in renewable energy that maybe you need around $1 billion per gigawatt just to produce the power. So, and then on top of that, you have the electrolyzers and everything else. So do the math here, and you realize that it's off the chart. You waited a long time, our host, Minister Saleh. We are so grateful for being here, and we now look forward to hearing from you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين. أولا اسمحوا لي أن أرحب معالي الوزير الأول سيد الشيخ العافية والمحمد خونا رئيس الغرفة التجارية الذي موجود معنا. شكرا على حضورك. أصحاب السعادة السفراء، أصحاب السعادة ممثلو الدول الإفريقية، أعضاء التحالف الهيدروجين الأخضر، السيد جوناس موبرغ رئيس منظمة الهيدروجين الأخضر، السادة والسيدات شركات مطورة لمشاريع الهيدروجين الأخضر، أيها السيدات والسادة زملائي الأعزاء، أهلا وسهلا بكم. يسرني أن أكون معكم اليوم في هذا الحفل افتتاح أعمال هذا المؤتمر الذي يتناول موضوعا هاما بالنسبة لنا وللعالم، ألا هو تسريع التمويل لمشاريع الهيدروجين الأخضر في إفريقيا. أيها السيدات والسادة، رسمت العديد من التقارير الرئيسية الصادرة في الفترة التي سبقت الجولة الأخيرة لمؤتمر المناخ كوب 27 صورة قاتمة لتفاقم التأثيرات المناخية، وأبرزت النقص الكبير في التقدم في مجال خفض الانبعاثات الضارة وهكذا نتحول إلى الطاقة النظيفة هو حجر الزاوية بالنسبة للتنمية المستدامة ومواجهة التغيرات المناخية. وبرز الهيدروجين الأخضر كحل بديل لتسريع التحول الطاقوي، حيث أكدت الوكالة الدولية للطاقة في تقريرها الشهير تقرير 2019 أن الهيدروجين الأخضر سيساعد في معالجة العديد من التحديات الحرجة للطاقة، وإنه يمكن أن يوفر طرقا لإزالة الكربون من مجموعة من القطاعات بما في ذلك النقل المسافات الطويلة والصناعات المواد الكيميائية والحديد الصلب، كما يمكن أن يساعد في تعزيز أمن الطاقوي لجميع بلدان العالم. ومع تزايد عدد البلدان الملتزمة بإزالة الكربون عن اقتصادها، أصبح الهيدروجين الأخضر محورا رئيسيا في استراتيجياتها الوطنية، واكتسب زخما متزايدا بسبب أسعار الطاقة المتجددة التي أصبحت أكثر تنافسية، والتحسينات التكنولوجية المستمرة، والحاجة إلى مزيد من المرونة في أنظمة الطاقة. وقد أصبح من الواضح اليوم أن العالم دخل سباقا على الطاقة النظيفة يتعزز باستمرار مع تتالي الأزمات، خاصة جائحة كوفيد والحرب في أوكرانيا، تلك الأزمات التي أضعفت سلاسل الإمداد وفاقمت المخاوف المتعلقة بالأمن الطاقوي. وفي هذا الإطار برزت إفريقيا كقارة تمتاز بإمكانات هامة ومميزة فيما يتعلق بالطاقات المتجددة، حيث تحتوي القارة على 45% من إجمالي الإشعاع الشمسي العالمي، كما تتميز بإمكانات هامة من طاقات الرياح. وعلى وجه الخصوص تتميز دول التحالف الإفريقي للهيدروجين الأخضر أجا بإمكانات مهمة من الطاقة المتجددة تؤهلها لإنتاج الهيدروجين الأخضر والطاقات النظيفة بكميات كبيرة وأسعار تنافسية. على سبيل المثال، أكدت دراسة أجراها مكتب الخبراء الدولي ماكنزي في السنة الماضية أن دول التحالف الإفريقي للهيدروجين الأخضر يمكنها أن تصدر ما بين 30 إلى 60 مليون طن سنويا من الهيدروجين الأخضر في أفق 2050، ولكن ذلك سيتطلب ما بين 500 إلى 970 جيجاوات من الطاقة المتجددة، وهو ما يتطلب استثمارات قد تصل إلى 870 مليار دولار أمريكي. وغير بعيد عن هذه الخلاصة، أكدت دراسة حديثة قام بها البنك الأوروبي للاستثمار والتحالف الدولي للطاقة الشمسية أن الدول الإفريقية يمكن أن تنتج أكثر من 50 مليون طن سنويا من الهيدروجين في حدود 2035 من خلال 4 مناطق رئيسية للإنتاج، وهي موريتانيا والمغرب ومصر وجنوب إفريقيا. إلا أن تحويل هذه الإمكانات إلى واقع تنموي يتطلب تعبئة موارد مالية ضخمة ورفع كفاءات التكنولوجية للبلدان وخلق سوق التبادل يمكن أن تشكل قاعدة صلبة لضمان تمويل المشاريع، كما يتطلب توفير بنية تحتية مناسبة. وستتطلب قبل كل شيء وضع إطار قانوني وتنظيمي ومؤسسي يضمن للقطاع الخاص والاستثمار الخارجي أن يلعب دورا أساسيا في إنتاج تحويل وتصدير الهيدروجين الأخضر ومشتقاته. ويشكل جذب الاستثمار الخارجي من أجل تمويل هذه المشاريع التحدي الرئيسي أمام الدول النامية، حيث يلاحظ أن غالبية المشاريع الهيدروجين الأخضر التي وصلت إلى القرار النهائي للاستثمار موجودة في الدول الصناعية وليست مع الأسف في الدول النامية. ويقول التقرير الخاص عن الاستثمار العالمي في مجال الطاقة 2021 الذي أعدته الوكالة الدولية للطاقة والتعاون مع البنك الدولي أن تكلفة التمويل في الدول النامية أعلى ب7 أضعاف مما هي عليه في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية وفي أوروبا. وهذا هو التحدي الكبير وهذا هو التحدي وراء اجتماعنا اليوم. وهنا تبرز أهمية التشاور الذي نقوم به من خلال التحالف الإفريقي للهيدروجين الأخضر، والذي يشكل قناة هامة لتنسيق السياسات في مجال تطوير الهيدروجين، ويشكل هذا المؤتمر نموذجا لهذا التنسيق من بين الحكومات وشركاء التنمية ومؤسسات التمويل والقطاع الخاص، حيث يهدف إلى دراسة أفضل الطرق لتسريع وتيرة الاستثمار في مشاريع الهيدروجين الأخضر في موريتانيا ودول إفريقيا، واستكشاف آليات تمويل جديدة مبتكرة لإطلاق وتعبئة رأس المال المطلوب. أيها السيدات والسادة، أن موريتانيا لديها إمكانيات هائلة في مجال الطاقة المتجددة تقيم بأكثر من 4000 جيجاوات، ومنها 500 جيجاوات قابلة للتطوير على الفور، وبموجب موقعها الجغرافي المتميز كنقطة التقاء بين قارات إفريقيا وأوروبا وقريبة من أمريكا، واتساع مساحاتها وقلة عدد سكانها نسبيا، واحتياطاتها من المعادن وخاصة من الحديد. هذه كلها عوامل تجعلها مؤهلة بدرجة كبيرة لأن تصبح أحد اللاعبين المهمين في السوق العالمي للهيدروجين الأخضر وطاقات القد المتجددة، بل الصناعات الخضراء بشكل عام. وكانت الحكومة الموريتانية بتوجيهات من فخامة رئيس الجمهورية السيد محمد الشيخ القزواني سباقة لتبني التحول الطاقوي وتطوير الهيدروجين كأولوية، وشكل بالفعل مؤتمر نواكشوط للهيدروجين المنظم يوم 24 مايو 2022 بإشراف وحضور فخامة رئيس الجمهورية محطة مهمة في هذا التوجه، حيث اجتمع ولأول مرة الفاعلون في مجال الطاقات والمعادن والبترول لتدارس الفرص التي يمكن أن يوفرها التحول الطاقوي لجميع هذه الفاعلين. ولقد وضعت الحكومة الموريتانية رؤية طاقوية طموحة تهدف إلى ضمان تموقعها مستقبلا كقطب إقليمي مندمج لإنتاج الطاقات المتكاملة، الغاز والطاقات المتجددة، وكذلك المعادن المحولة وإنتاج الصلب الأخضر والمعادن منخفضة الكربون وتصديرها للأسواق الأجنبية. وهذا قد أطلقت الحكومة العديد من الأنشطة والدراسات التي من شأنها تحضير البلد لتطوير وتثمين استقلال الإمكانات الوطنية من الطاقات المتجددة، ومن بينها أولا خارطة الطريق لتطوير الهيدروجين الأخضر والهيدروجين الأخضر والهيدروجين المنخفض الكربون، والسجل ودراسة السجل العقاري للهيدروجين، كما يتم الآن إعداد قانون للهيدروجين الأخضر وأول مدونة قد تكون بالعالم. وتزامنا مع هذه الأنشطة والدراسات وقعت بلادنا عدد من اتفاقيات لتطوير مشاريع الهيدروجين الأخضر لما مجموعه 85 جيجاوات من الطاقات المتجددة، وتشكل كذلك دراسات المحتوى المحلي الذي بدأت بمشروع شاريوت عنصرا أساسيا لجميع هذه الأنشطة. أيها السيدات والسادة، إن تجسيد استراتيجية تطوير الهيدروجين الأخضر والتي تحظى اليوم بدعم كبير من شركائنا التنمية يتطلب تعبئة استثمار خارجي كبير وفي وقت وجيز. وإن مؤتمرنا اليوم سيسلط الضوء على الإشكالات التمويل مشاريع الهيدروجين الأخضر في إفريقيا وطرق تسريعها، كما تسلط أعمال المؤتمر الضوء على الفوائد الاقتصادية والاجتماعية من اقتصاد الهيدروجين الأخضر، وتناقش التحويلات الحاسمة الضرورية لتحقيق هذه الفوائد التي تشمل خلق صناعات عالية النمو وتعزيز التنمية الاقتصادية وخلق وظائف نظيفة ومستدامة بأعداد كبيرة. وبالختام اسمحوا لي أتقدم بالشكر لكل شركائنا الذين واكبونا في المسار ويواكبونا في مسار هذا المسار الطويل الطموح، وأذكر من بين الشركاء الاتحاد الأوروبي والتعاون الفرنسي والتعاون الألماني والاتحاد والبنك الدولي والبنك الإفريقي للتنمية، وأشكر كذلك منظمة الهيدروجين الأخضر ودول منظمة التحالف الإفريقي للهيدروجين الأخضر على تنظيم هذا الملتقى في نواكشوط. وأخص بالشكر السيد جوناس موبرغ. Just a few words to pay tribute to the incredible leadership of Mr. Jonas Moberg, who has been behind our meeting today, and he's pushing the green hydrogen agenda in the world and for the benefit for African countries. And thank you all. And let me also recognize my dear colleagues, the Minister of Environment, Ms. Lalia Kamara, who was with us at the COP27 as well, and Mr. Mrav Benaik, Minister of Commerce and Industry. And many thanks to the ambassadors, all of them that are here. Thank you all. Thank you. And thanks to Dan Milstein, who's from the Department of Energy of the US, who also is joining us. Thanks all.
Minister Saleh, thank you again. Can I ask you a quick question? Excellent. Why don't you stay there? And if you guys could come over here, please. So this is you here. Huh? Could you tell us? Could you guys, you represent over here? Could you tell us a little bit more about the code? We've heard a little bit about this code the hydrogen code and so on. The enabling environment that makes this happen. So I wonder if you could give us a little bit more practically what you hope to, in a way, set out through the code to enable this.
Thank you. You know, the code, we started the code after we have talked to all the colleagues. We are discussing with them.
Do you want to speak in French or Arabic?
Maybe we'll speak in English. I think there is a good translation so that also you can, and it maybe a few words of French, maybe a little of Arabic. We started this code because we engaged with our partners and we are moving with a convention with TWP. We started with the chariot as well, and we realized that we need some common grounds to all the developers. That was needed for two things. First, we need to strike a balance with the interest of the country, the benefit that the country can derive from the green hydrogen development, while at the same time attracting foreign direct investment. This is the big question. Where to put the cursor? This is the question. So, but we may not arrive at that immediately because we don't have a precedent. So it's only through dialogue that we can, of course, also looking at what is available as experience, knowledge in the rest of the world. So we started with the support of World Bank, with a consultancy firm. We made some proposals. We are in the dialogue with our developers and partners, and the idea is really to arrive at the cursor. But I can tell it straightforward. Mauritania is not expecting money from this project. We are expecting development and sustainable development. And that's what I tell them. Look, in your project, you have to think, number one, what will be delivered is sustainable development. Meaning what? Economic growth, employment, good employment, employment for the youth, transformation, industrialization. You know, there is one question about Africa. Africa is lagging essentially because we are not industrialized. I am summarizing. I'm aware there are multiple reasons. I can mention infrastructure, education, institutions, etc. All of it. We know more or less why countries are failing today. Because we have huge experience. It's not like in the 60s, 70s. We have experimented everything. We have extremely liberal strategies. We have state-driven country strategies, development strategies. We have enormous amount of knowledge coming from historians who have asked the question, why the Islamic world that was leading in the in the mid 15 or 5 or 600 years ago has suddenly collapsed. Why it's China, why is it Europe and not China that have developed it? You know, we have an incredible amount of knowledge coming from the historian, but also from assessing the recent economic development strategy. We know more or less why countries, but one thing that is critical is industrialization. And if you don't industrialize, you don't create value, you don't generate value added, and you don't create employment. You can go whatever way you wish, are not on an industrialization path, you will not address the critical challenge. This is why green hydrogen is interesting for Mauritania. And this is why I'm asking colleagues, please help us deliver transformation of the economy, value added and employment. We are not looking at you to take money. We are looking at BP and gas to give us the money.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We applaud, appreciate, and will be guided by your leadership. We'll now take a 15-minute break, and then we'll continue with the rest of the program. Once again, thank you, sir, and thank you, everyone.
Are also very important for Mauritania.
Thank you, Ninka. Could you just explain a little bit more? Okay, we get the bigger picture here. We need to train people and so on. How at this early stage of development, what are the sort of practical next steps in building those values and those training and other things? And it strikes us, I think, also that a lot of things when it comes to these very large projects is about timing and sequencing. When is there funding available for what, when?
Yeah.
Could you address that a little bit?
Yes, sure. Yes, so 2030, that's what it's mostly all about. And if you then, it feels like tomorrow, to be honest. So if we have these large-scale projects, then 2030 is tomorrow. So you really have to start backcasting and see who do we need to get to these next steps to get to 2030. And then you can make like an analysis of how we need a new policy framework, we need an investment framework, we need several kinds of investments, we need skilled and trained people. How are we going to do this? How are we going to, do we have enough water, desalinated water? So really, well, start backcasting from 2030 or whatever the goal is and see what it means for today. And then most of the time you really you can start with the no regrets. Like train people, get a center of excellence, train people not only the engineers, not only vocational training, but also train people for the policy frameworks. So really make a combination of the technical part and the enabling environment. Make it visible, tell people what you do, because people want to understand and then they want to contribute to it.
Thank you, that's great. I wonder if we could move on to you, Laurent. Again, we heard from your colleague from Adonis in the previous session. So I guess we're interested to hear from you what you think missed out. More seriously, I wonder if you can address the points that Ninka spoke about in terms of how do we get the sequencing, the timing of these various steps sufficiently right in this early phases towards financial investment decisions?
I think as much as we throw big numbers to people, and these numbers are enormous, I think Adonis was right to emphasize, to give you a sense, I think the current generation of power in Mauritania is about 800 megawatts, and we talked about 50 gigawatts. So there is a huge jump that needs to happen. In terms of infrastructure, there will be significant infrastructure upgrade, creation of new infrastructure, roads, harbor, all of this is to be done. And I think to me, the key takeaway word in this initial step is partnership. Because ultimately, if government, private sector, and facing itself, because Africa tends to be seen as a continent which provides, which presents itself with higher risks for investors. So we need to work together to make sure that perception is addressed, and that people can realize that actually investing in Mauritania is good, and it provides for a long-term perspective. That's another point. And I think, the risk, and you've seen it in mining, someone mentioned extractive, is that, we look at these projects and we think they're going to be the solution for everything, every problem and so on. I think there is a huge opportunity in terms of training and providing employment for a large number of people, but ultimately investors tend to focus their attention on the project they are in charge of. We have, because of our mandate, we have little capacity to address the broadly with the EU and so on, saying we as private sector partners want to make sure that development partners not only support and advise us, but importantly support government and advise government on all of these policy issues, all of the issues that are bigger than our projects. And again, capacity building is a critical one. Shared infrastructure, I'm aware that there's work ongoing led by the ministry around a study on shared infrastructure. Again, this is a very strong positive signal to us.
That's great, Laurent. Thank you so much. Everyone, I want to say to myself and to everyone, of course, we're working in at least 3 languages here, so we need to speak a little bit slowly.
Yeah, sorry. And again, so one is I think private sector can do a better job at working together on these issues. We haven't done enough work, interacting with CWP and BP more recently, and how much, can we do more together? Because ultimately, if you're going to do a local content strategy, there's probably no requirement for having 4 or 5 of these. And the second thing is, you're right, long term is something that really, governments and development partners are much more equipped, and it fits their mandate to look at longer term issues, policy issues. Private sector is often, can contribute, can support, can inform, but that's not the nature of the beast. So I think again, and we've had these conversations and we're having them today, we'll have them tomorrow, is to say, how can private sector help and support, but really in terms of policies and creating the frameworks and so on, and deciding that a new institution needs to be created or that you need to strengthen an existing institution, that is really something that is, part of government's mandate. Again, with our support, because we need to inform, we need to provide data to inform the strategy. And I think certainly from a charity perspective, we are happy to share any information we have that helps inform the policies and the implementation of the policies.
Yeah. Just a short reaction to that. You might just from our perspective and on the lens, what we do on several parts of the world right now is that we start project organizations financed by private sector, banks, and governments that really organize all these stuff. So might this be interesting, just a question to perhaps our speakers, to get a blueprint and a kind of office that organizes actually all you need, not only as private sector, but also the government.
Dean, there are many questions that I'm sure you wish to have.
Yeah, thank you, James. I apologise in advance. I've got a pretty severe ear infection, so this whole event sounds like a scuba diving exhibition to me at the moment. So I apologise if I intervene at inappropriate volumes at times.
Very clear and good.
Okay, all right. Look, a lot of really interesting questions raised already. I think it's fair to say that it would be very difficult to design a uniform template for reaching FID on these very large projects up front. There's no kind of one-size-fits-all. Each project has its own characteristics, many of them unique to the situation, and so we need to be kind of flexible in our thinking. That being said, there are examples that we can use already from the past, extractive industries, but also in the emerging projects in the green hydrogen industry now, which start to set a good direction of travel and also start to teach us some very important lessons. If I take one example, is the project in Northwest Australia that we are developing under the operatorship and major shareholding of BP, called the Australian Renewable Energy Hub. Like our Amman project, it's in the 25 to 30 gigawatt overall scale.
Se passe, l'actualité géopolitique se passe. Une crise énergétique mondiale qui est... On est dans une réunion sur l'hydrogène, mais je ne peux pas ne pas le dire, chers collègues. Une crise énergétique qui est causée par une invasion injustifiée, illégale, sans fondement par la Russie, et qui crée vraiment une crise énergétique mondiale qui touche tous les pays. Donc, et tous les ménages de ce pays, de tous les pays africains, chez nous aussi. Donc, là-dessus, un deuxième package chez nous, en 2022, l'année dernière, très récente, qui accélère encore plus le mouvement, qui accélère encore plus de mécanismes pour justement stimuler les financements, stimuler le marché, stimuler la structuration de ces marchés. Alors, je ne vais pas passer en revue toutes les mesures qui sont dans le package qui s'appelle Repower EU. Il y a toute une panoplie de mesures qui sont là. Vous en parlerez, je crois, Jonas, la banque qui stimule la décarbonisation de nos industries. Donc, encore toute une panoplie de mesures qui sont là, et il y a en fait là-dedans une augmentation de la cible énergie renouvelable qui était déjà important et à laquelle on a augmenté l'ambition, la force du marché européen pour structurer ce marché et tirer la demande. Alors, évidemment, souvent on y revient toujours, la stabilité de ce climat. Souvent on y revient toujours, la stabilité de ce climat des affaires, les ressources humaines, elles doivent être là. C'est des projets d'une envergure énorme. Elles doivent être là. Le dérisking qui découle de tout ça, il doit être là pour que ces projets, et des projets bancables doivent être mis sur la table. Donc, il y a une part interne chez nous, il y a une part très forte. Les partenaires, le ministre est là, et le ministre est le premier à le savoir, il est investisseur, je sais qu'il le sait, nous en parlons souvent, doit être là. Et puis nous, l'Europe, acteurs du développement, on a une très forte ambition pour être là aux côtés pour accompagner ce développement. Est en train d'essayer de jouer son rôle de catalyseur, à la fois par les réformes fortes, ambitieuses que nous menons sur notre marché interne et par notre action de notre outillage externe qu'on est en train de transformer. Mais une vérité est là, une vérité incontournable est là dans cette crise existentielle et cette crise énergétique que nous vivons aujourd'hui. Nous le savions déjà que la transition vers des énergies vertes, c'était une nécessité. Mais maintenant, dans cette crise-là, nous savons que c'est incontournable et que c'est maintenant. Donc, voilà, soyez sûrs, nous sommes là pour soutenir ce mouvement. Merci.
Thank you very much. It's very comprehensive, very clear, and hugely important relationship between countries like Mauritania and the European Union. There is a slight challenge here. We got to move that energy from here to Europe. We know that it has to be done responsibly to everyone's benefit. There are measures in place, different options. Obviously,
Le gouvernement du Niger a une politique, une ambition d'exportation de l'énergie électrique vers les pays voisins, tout en sachant que nous avons un défi énorme dans la satisfaction de nos besoins à l'interne. Parmi les pays que vous avez cités, le Niger c'est un petit pays, devant l'Égypte, devant l'Éthiopie, devant l'Afrique du Sud, mais c'est un pays qui dispose d'un sol important et qui dispose d'une ressource énergétique diversifiée. Ce pays dispose du pétrole, dispose d'un potentiel éolien important, et c'est pour cela que très tôt, avec l'appui des partenaires techniques et financiers, le Niger s'est mis parmi les grands pays pour disposer d'abord d'une union sur l'hydrogène. C'est l'un des pays soutenus par la sous-région, la CEDEAO, pour former des cadres. Donc, pour montrer que le Niger est une ressource humaine capable, en tout cas, de prendre en charge la problématique de la production de l'hydrogène d'ici les années à venir. D'autre part, excusez-moi, voilà. D'autre part, nous pensons que pour qu'il y ait un essor considérable de la production de l'énergie dans nos États, il faut qu'il y ait une place importante aux acteurs privés. Il faut qu'on accorde un soutien important aux secteurs privés. Et c'est pour cela, au Niger, nous avons entrepris des réformes avec le soutien de la Banque mondiale, avec le soutien de l'Union européenne, pour apporter des réformes qui vont permettre au secteur privé d'avoir de la place dans la production de l'énergie renouvelable, mais principalement dans la production future de l'hydrogène. Donc, de façon résumée, voilà ce que je peux dire. S'il y a des questions, je reviendrai là-dessus de façon plus précise. Merci.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting, and we are really looking forward to working closely together with you and your government. We're slowly coming towards the end of this session, and I would like to give everyone a chance. What should be on top of our priority list as we pack up tomorrow and so on? I don't know.
The government's done an incredible job at bringing a whole host of potential partners here. The critical need to ensure that they are aligned and cooperating and doing the most efficient.
So we think that based on our experience in Europe, we work with the hydrogen valleys, and the reason why hydrogen valleys work, because it is actually a plan on how you organize a hydrogen ecosystem. And that definitely mitigates risk, not only for the technical value chain, but also for the financial, bring this prosperous future to a region. So use the experience of other regions. That is really what we need to really accelerate this energy transition and tackle this climate crisis.
Thank you. And now, do you have any message for us?
Le mix énergétique, la part des énergies renouvelables dans le mix central.
Il ne faut pas oublier l'histoire génitale. Évidemment, nous Européens sommes également très intéressés de pouvoir importer. Quand on réussit dans cette énergie, il est absolument.
So thank you so much.
Thank you, Susanna, and I'll take this opportunity to first thank you to the government for hosting us here. It's an honor to be also in this table, so thank you for that. I'm glad actually we're starting with your opportunities, because this session is going to be about what are the things that are blocking But if we look at some of the key opportunities, if I start with how we expect the hydrogen industry to evolve, we're going to be thinking, first we're going to be looking at some of the more local opportunities that is existing opportunities today, that it's all about decarbonizing operations. This is an example in BP in this case, so we are starting with decarbonizing some of our refineries. We're also what we call like hubs or clusters, which is where you have some local demand, one industry, different industries, but they provide a scale to be able to, just a certain scale that provides some synergy, which are opportunities that are going to be competing globally. Through MBP, we're looking at the three of those, but I would like to talk particularly, and when we're looking at the markets, we're looking mostly into the hubs and in the third category. So Africa can play into. So one of the key pieces, and I think it's come up, and obviously in order to export, we're going to find that these projects are going to be competing not only with other projects in country or with neighborhood countries, but they are going to be competing with projects globally. So excellent renewable resources is one of the key areas. There are a few other things that we would usually look at for competitiveness and for ensuring that we have the right parameters that we need to progress projects. That is good access to water, infrastructure. We've been talking about quite a bit about infrastructure this morning. So do we have the right, is there the right infrastructure? Can we build? How can we facilitate? Also, something that has come up, and I think I'll probably talk a bit more later too, is regulatory framework, stability, not only on the export countries, which is very important, but also on the import countries and the connection between those two. Local demand can help anchor a project before we're thinking of exporting. So there's a series of things that we look at when we're trying to think what are some of these export places that can actually compete with some of the other areas in the world, in particularly where they have different demand pools.
Sorry, get confused with only one mic. Well, thank you very much, and it's important to hear about the different dimensions and the issues that you're talking about. Of course, coming from the World Bank, the aspect about having the right regulatory frameworks, institutional capacity is something that we really consider quite important, and we work with governments on that to build that capacity. So now I would like to quickly pass on to Mr. Dion, and I was going to ask you if you could please tell us a little bit more.
Merci beaucoup, Susanna, de l'occasion que vous m'offrez, et merci également aux organisateurs, et merci à notre terre d'accueil, la Mauritanie. Le Sénégal, naturellement, s'inscrit dans la mouvance mondiale de développement durable. Et je dirais même qu'en termes d'énergie renouvelable, on est parmi les leaders. À partir de la COP21, depuis la COP21, le Sénégal a décidé de faire donc des énergies renouvelables une priorité. Et au moment où je vous parle, 30% de la capacité de production d'électricité au Sénégal correspond à du solaire et à de l'éolien. Ça veut donc dire que nous sommes convaincus que l'avenir, ce sont des énergies durables et que nous sommes convaincus que l'avenir, c'est les énergies propres. Au Sénégal, nous avons de l'eau, nous avons du vent et nous avons du soleil. Par conséquent, le potentiel existe pour donc pouvoir donc franchir le pas. Et c'est pourquoi nous voulons profiter également du fait que nous avons du gaz pour y aller pas à pas, à travers donc une transition énergétique. Nous allons développer ce qu'on appelle le gas to power pour produire suffisamment d'électricité, parce que l'électricité, on en a besoin. Vous savez que l'Afrique, le problème de l'Afrique aujourd'hui, c'est l'accès universel à l'électricité. Si on prend la région subsaharienne, c'est environ 50% des populations qui ont accès à l'électricité. Donc je dis bien que la priorité sera donc de faire du gas to power pour faire accéder aux populations sénégalaises à l'électricité, mais également pour avoir des ressources qui nous permettront d'aller vers l'hydrogène vert. Parce que
is one of the points that can study even deeper if there is some specific option, and that is the starting of that process and starting of the engaging with a different partner about this. Of course, but for all African support from the DFI, from our partner to find the innovative way to finance this project and to finance them with very low cost of capital, because it's also, in my view, it's shame if where there is a good potential, the cost of capital, while in...
It's like for a large green hydrogen project in an emerging economy. In particularly, we've been looking at the role of DFIs in providing blended and innovative financing for these projects. And the recommendations, we have 8 of them. They all draw on the experience from representatives from developers, commercial banks and investors that we have spoken to over the past few months. So we have identified 4 main roles for DFIs in providing blended financing. The first one is to develop the enabling environment or support an enabling environment. We have talked about these things today earlier. DFIs can provide technical assistance for preparing national hydrogen strategies, policies in general, regulatory frameworks, looking at the fiscal regimes, implementation roadmaps. We've also touched on infrastructure development needs. All of those things are important for the projects to land, so to speak, and be set in a good place. Specifically, DFIs can also help with the project preparation, prepare the environmental social impact assessment, or help with that, and also with the design and appraisal of the project. We move then to the financing, where there are plenty of options for the DFIs, like providing grants, providing equity, concessional or non-concessional lending, and the guarantees that are also need to be explored further. And finally, there is the role on the demand aggregation side, looking at supporting carbon credit schemes and off-take markets and auctions, which we will touch upon later also when we discuss with the panel. So, moving to the main recommendations, they are on page 22 in the document if you want to look at the full-fledged recommendations. Our main focus is on the project financing, so we will not be touching too much on the technical assistance, capacity building issues. So looking at the financing, and I think we have already stated this already, there is a massive need to scale up blended financing for this industry. It's estimated that we need $1.2 trillion of investment in the sector before 2030, and that annual flows from public and development finance institutions will need to be tripled over the next 5 years. So this is massive. There are already some DFIs who have announced significant transactions in this industry, but it's already, we need further speed and transparency, also things we touched upon. I want to mention specifically EBRD in Egypt, KfW, the PTX Hub, Dutch Invest International in Namibia, and then the World Bank's Hydrogen Initiative. Second recommendation is to scale up support for projects along the entire value chain. And I think what we have heard from our people we've talked about, the stakeholders, is that often it's the mere presence of a DFI and not necessarily the scale that makes a difference and can help reduce the risk and thereby lower capital. So maybe it's not just a matter of the amount of money, but it's how and where the DFIs get engaged. In addition to technical assistance, we found that DFIs should increase direct financing, including through anchor investments early on in the project, as well as the use of de-risking instruments. Private capital. Third recommendation is to develop a global investment platform for the green hydrogen economy, and I think this is also something we have already heard, that there is a need for DFIs to collaborate and leverage their comparative advantages and the skills that they have, also drawing on other sectors that they have been involved in. There are several platform models that have worked well in other areas, such as the Africa 50 and Just Energy Transition Partnership in South Africa. Maybe those models could serve as examples. Recommendation 4 is to develop a joint model for a bankable large-scale project in emerging and developing country. And we heard that there is no one-size-fits-all, but there might still be a need to have a framework in place that you can then tweak. But it would serve as a model that can be replicated, looking at specific risks in different cases for critical elements, and identifying options for de-risking these that you can learn from, replicating throughout the developing countries. Moving to the 5th recommendation is to increase co-financing for large-scale projects. So we think that large investments require, we know that large investment require risk sharing amongst different actors and sources of financing, and we believe that the DFIs could work together to further strengthen this collaboration and pool resources. It doesn't just need one DFI per project, but they could work together, including with local, like national development finance institutions and smaller regional ones. If everybody chips in, then we can share the risk. However, one thing that needs to be noted, and we've actually heard some mention of this, that there is also a risk if there's too much interest from the DFIs, there could be crowding out private investment. That is obviously during various stages of the project life cycle, and this we believe should be done on a significant scale. Finally, the 7th and 8th recommendations. The 7th is to support the development of a bond market for green hydrogen projects, and we believe that DFIs could provide anchor investments into this, provide insurance policies and credit guarantees, so that they would catalyze private capital for the green hydrogen sector. And finally, there's a bold recommendation. We'll see if anybody pays attention to it. We believe that the DFIs should try to develop a flagship project with one leading institution to showcase something that can be done. So these are the 8 recommendations from our study. I will now turn over to our distinguished panel. And let's see if I can... Can you hear me now? Okay, perfect. All right, so our panel, we have Sean Imbane from the African Development Bank. We have Thomas, no, maybe I should go in order, yeah, you wave. Thomas Opper from the European Commission. We have Alexandre Chavarot from Climate Finance 2050. And we have Gajendra Yadav, from Synergy Consulting. And I don't know if we have online Stefan Liebing from Conjuncta. We do. Okay, excellent. So I wanted to turn to you. I put 5 questions up on the board, and I wanted to ask you, well, you're free to address all of the questions how you see fit, but specifically I wanted to turn over to you, Wale, to ask what are the blended finance and de-risking instruments we'll need more of to get to bankable green hydrogen projects, and which financing models have the potential to be replicated for large-scale renewable projects and the green hydrogen industry. So,
thank you, Tove. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm from the African Development Bank. For those who are not familiar with the bank, we are the premier development finance institution for Africa. All 54 member Africa countries are shareholders of the bank, and we have about 13 non-regional members. So in relation to green hydrogen, permit me to be a little bit controversial. And Tove, I hope you take this in a good light. I actually believe that green hydrogen projects do not need blended finance. Development finance institutions have a role to play, a very important one, but these projects are so large and so transformative that blended finance is not the answer. If you take the example of, and I think these projects will go the way of LNG projects, by the way. If you take the example of Mozambique LNG, where you're talking about a $25 billion investment, the African Development Bank put in $400 million, but they didn't really need our money so much. It wasn't the money that we were bringing, but it was what we were bringing in terms of governance, in terms of providing the confidence for others to get involved. And as we saw on Mozambique, there was a security situation which meant that the project had to be put on hold. But the community engagement that the bank was able to do, and some of those, for some of the experience of dealing with local content and localization. These are areas where the bank and other DFIs can add a lot of value and provide confidence to the general populace and also to the country. And that's what we do for large projects. Some of these projects have very large shareholders with deep pockets. I mean, Mozambique LNG had an equity ticket of over $10 billion. And you had very strong sponsors who could write those equity checks. So for me, with hydrogen, we're talking about the right market signals. The polluting countries have to decarbonize as fast as possible, and they need to put the incentives in place for the hydrogen market to develop. And what the African countries can do is we take advantage of the export opportunity and then use that as the anchor investment to also develop our own economies and build the enabling infrastructure. When it comes to the enabling infrastructure, again, the DFIs have a role to play. So when it comes to electricity, we can build regional interconnections to be able to trade electricity and provide opportunities for industrialization. But what is happening with the carbon border adjustment mechanism in Europe is positive. What's happening with the IRA incentives in the US, these are all positive market signals. But when it comes to bankability, who's going to sign the offtakes, the long-term offtakes? Will there be people who want to engage in long-term contracts to make these deals bankable? Will they be providing tax incentives, and also you have a green premium, which will make it profitable to be able to import the green ammonia, for instance, from African countries. And we need to also think on a regional scale, on a continental scale. So African countries don't want to be competing against each other. That's why you need to harmonize the terms and conditions for engaging in these transactions. Again, banks such as ourselves can get involved in helping governments look at the fiscal terms for engaging with international investors. If you take the example of Qatar, for instance, Qatar didn't start out being a rich country, but they were able to develop into one of the largest LNG providers today because they took advantage of the market opportunity. And when we look at things we're trying to do in Africa, like the Africa Free Trade Area, again, we can use the fact that one country is developing these resources to be able to build shared infrastructure across borders. You know, so the regional entities have to be involved as well as the African Union on a continental scale. Again, Saudi is an example that took advantage of the world's hunger for fossil. And they built Saudi Aramco, which is one of the, if not the biggest company in the world today, because they took advantage of that opportunity. So for me, green hydrogen is going to evolve in a similar way. African countries have to be smart. They have to take advantage of the urgency of now. DFIs have a role to play, but the amount of blended finance available is a tiny drop in the ocean compared to what you need. So that's not the answer. The answer is for countries to put in place programs. The Americans put in the AGOA free trade arrangement, the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, to encourage textile manufacturers to export into the US. That's what we need on a global scale, continental scale, to send the right price signals, and if those are there, the investment will go into the countries, and for us as African countries, we have to make sure we can capture the benefit of those investments. There's nothing wrong with an export.
Just a quick follow-up question, maybe that you could address. But what do you see the role of DFIs in the de-risking? We have a lot, you know. I understand that the capital is not there to finance the entire industry, but in the specific role of de-risking that we found many of the stakeholders that they mentioned, is there something that you could do?
That's fine. We're already doing that. So at the African Development Bank, we have the Africa Legal Support Facility. There we provide technical expertise to African countries so that when they negotiate contracts with the private sector, international private sector, they're able to negotiate on a level playing field. So we provide world-class legal and financial expertise to support these countries so that these arrangements are not one-sided. So that's one example. The other example is how do we use the proceeds, the export proceeds, to develop local economies? So we help governments in terms of putting the right governance in place, even savings policies. Many governments do not have proper savings. You know, you can't spend everything you earn from exporting without thinking about the future. So whether or not you create sovereign wealth funds to look at savings within government, how they manage sudden windfall in order to create local content and build skills. So these are areas where with the access we have to government, we engage in the policy dialogue to help them channel those proceeds of the windfall so you don't fall into a natural resource curse that we've seen in many African countries. So the best way for us to intervene is by creating the enabling environment and the systems and the capacity that the governments need in order to prepare themselves for the windfall that is going to come in, for the benefit of the growth of their economies and creation of employment, etc.
Thank you very much. So moving over to question number 3, is there a role for public institutions and DFI as demand aggregators in the market for green hydrogen offtake agreements? I'd like to move over to Alexandre, if you would like to say a few words. And then I'll also have Thomas address the same.
Thank you, Tove. I'm Alexandre Chavarot. I'm a climate and energy transition finance advisor working for CWP. My background is in project financial structuring, project capital raising, project valuation across the energy sector and particularly energy infrastructure, and with a particular interest and liking for first-of-a-kind, frontier, difficult projects to finance. So I'm very pleased to be here because I think what we're talking about perfectly meets these various criteria. I think the question you raised, Tove, perhaps suggests that the business as usual approach to financing energy infrastructure projects won't work in the case of green hydrogen in Africa. And so I think we need to recognize that there is a different perspective. The traditional perspective is to look at a bottom-up approach of mobilizing capital, where project developers, having designed, defined, and developed their projects, turn to lenders and say, please confirm that this is bankable or help me make it bankable, and then please provide capital alongside my equity. But I would say, as my first observation, if we continue to do that, we'll still be here in 20 years' time talking about the first flagship green hydrogen project financing somewhere in Africa. Because the market is not developed enough today, and won't be for quite some time, to ensure that the typical requirements of lenders, including DFI institutions, are met at the moment. I think what we need, and as mentioned implicitly by Jonas and various people participating in sessions this morning, is a top-down approach to changing the financial architecture that will support green hydrogen, particularly in Africa. And so that means mobilizing more capital, and we can discuss what the role of DFI is. That means creating innovative demand structures for the product, and that also means thinking about blending and putting public and private sector capital together. So let me, in answering your question, then make 2 further observations, and then I have, if I may, 2 recommendations. So my second observation, and this is where I agree with Walid, is that it's for the developers to do that with governments and all the entire participants in the value chain, including off-takers, and equally DFIs are not there to absorb all risks. They're there to confirm that the risk allocation is bankable and indeed to tilt such risk allocation so that it can meet the finish line. So we shouldn't be unfair on what the DFIs can or cannot do. Having said this, I think they play a very important role, and should play a role in, first of all, lowering the cost of capital, such that the levelized cost of hydrogen can be as low as possible, and therefore such that green hydrogen products sold on the international marketplace are competitive. Second, they can play a very significant role in participating in the design of subsidy mechanisms that would underpin project economics, as well as the design of de-risking structures, of which potentially demand aggregation vehicles are an example. The second observation I want to make is that the DFIs don't have in their books, on their balance sheets, the bulk of capital that's required to finance green hydrogen at scale. Neither do commercial lenders, by the way. That capital sits in New York, in London, in Singapore, and in various regional financial centers, and is managed by institutional investors through their bond portfolio allocations. And so the question we should ask ourselves is how, together with DFIs and governments, can we develop structures that will eventually allow all these green hydrogen projects to tap into the international and regional bond markets. And so my two recommendations in that regard are, firstly, to think about the creation of an AGA finance vehicle that will help to pool and recycle capital, whereby DFIs would work together, as you suggested, and as indeed some of the recommendations mentioned, and would deploy that capital in a sort of planned and collaborative way across the different segments of the green hydrogen value chain. There would be some capital that could be provided as loans, as perhaps some form of long-term funding to enable the funding of enabling infrastructure. There could be capital that would be provided to fund feed costs for the wind and solar projects. Help refinance parts of these segments as and when the international green hydrogen market is much more mature, as and when long-term offtake agreements with stable volume and pricing signals can become bankable. And so my suggestion is to think about pooling DFI resources, focusing on the enabling environment, as was discussed this morning, focusing on providing attractive terms of funding for early stage and late stage development, focusing on the construction, funding the construction of projects, and then secondly, on refinancing that. And refinancing through guarantees, again, as you mentioned, Tove, credit enhancements, such that international bond investors can be mobilized. The second recommendation as part of that is perhaps to look at quite specific finance instruments, and I know some of you are going to Washington tomorrow, and so I would call this a Washington shopping list, if I may, to potentially have some EU, some US, some international OECD funded pools of capital that would backstop the credit risk that ECAs would take if they were to provide ECA export credits to fund feed costs in the late development stage of some of the upstream components of the hydrogen value chain. Traditionally, ECAs now these days come through project finance structures, but my point is that we're not going to be in a position to have a bankable project finance structures in quite some time. So let's think about other ways of mobilizing ECAs, and that means having some international government capital to backstop residual risk that ECAs may take, point number one. Point number two, have some of the international finance with DFIs provides very long-term loans. I'm talking 50 years as opposed to 15 years, at very low interest rates. I'm talking zero interest rates as opposed to a few percentage points, to enable the common infrastructure and with appropriate input from governments. And then think about construction finance loans, with therefore the question as to how you address refinancing risks. And again, maybe have some international pool of capital that could be there to backstop some of that refinancing risks. And then last but not least, as and when it comes to putting in place long-term project financing on the back of offtake contracts, think about innovative debt service and amortization structures, whereby the debt service obligations could perhaps be linked to international green hydrogen stroke ammonia price indices to ensure that the shareholders are not out of sync. So there's a number of, I think, innovations in terms of structure, where we pool and we recycle and we scale up, as well as financial instruments, which could perhaps help kickstart the financing of the sector.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Very, very interesting comments and or inputs. And I would also like to invite the other panelists, if you want to comment on your colleagues' interventions, feel free to just give an indication. So Thomas, over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Happy to be here. Excited to be here. I'm Thomas Opera. I'm at the European Commission in Brussels, where I work at the Department for International Partnerships. And there I'm following energy, climate change, and in particular green hydrogen. Now, I think we heard a lot today, and my colleagues have outlined this, the challenges that we face in developing the green hydrogen economy and the risks and how to de-risk these challenges. And there were some very, very interesting suggestions. I very like the one on how the DFIs can actually come into these huge financial challenges. And in this context, I would like to share a few thoughts that Troy mentioned, the European Hydrogen Bank and the policy initiatives that are currently ongoing and which I think can provide some input into this discussion. So the EU has very early on recognized the importance of green hydrogen and the contribution it can give to the energy transition and to decarbonizing challenging sectors. Just to name a few policy documents, there was the hydrogen strategy in 2020 already, and more recently the REPower objectives have set import and domestic production targets of 10 billion tons respectively. These are substantial targets. And at international level, we are looking to establish win-win partnerships with our partner countries in creating these opportunities for local development, for supporting the energy transition of our partner countries. And I think that is also an important element in addressing risks, because there is a perceived investment risk. We have heard this previously too. And having win-win situation with partner countries that projects and investments in green hydrogen economy deliver for the socio-economic development in the host countries, as it's called, that is critical, because that manages this risk, that contributes to this risk. And I would make the suggestion to even maybe strengthen this in this very good document that you have shared today. This strengthening these win-win partnerships with countries, because it contributes to managing risks, to perceived investment risks. Within this framework of these EU policies, the recently announced European Hydrogen Bank plays an important role. In a nutshell, it builds on three pillars, three elements. It seeks to support the production of green hydrogen within the EU and in partner countries. It looks at getting a better understanding of the economics of projects, of trade flows of hydrogen, to get more transparency and understanding in how this green hydrogen economy can work in future, or will work in future. And a third critical element is to coordinate the various EU investment instruments and financing instruments, including guarantees, loans, and facilitate blending with DFI. So these are the three elements of it. As such, it complements very well the framework that we have developed. And looking forward, its operation implementation is, we plan it by the end of the year. There's a communication, by the way, it has been issued earlier last 16th of March, if I'm not mistaken, and outlines very much much more in detail than much more details that I'm giving here. And the idea is to have it operational by the end of the year. and to use this time also to listen and to refine the design. And that's why a meeting like this is very, very helpful, because you get a feedback of projects, of challenges that can feed also into this design. I think I stop.
Actually, I'm going to try this now. It's working. So thank you so much. Before you hand over to your colleague, can I just ask a follow-up question? So everybody has said that, oh, this is a great initiative. It's very good that it's happening, but it's not going to be enough. So is this a pilot that's going to be explored, whether it works or not, and then maybe stepped up, or is this, how do you see it?
One has to start somewhere. And it's we heard it today, I think 1 or 2 times, it's a nascent sector. So this is it comes at scale already. And it's not that there are no initiatives ongoing already. For example, H2 Global, the German initiative is, I think the last auction is 900 million, if I'm not mistaken. So there are significant initiatives ongoing already. And of course, there is a learning, there has to be evaluation coming from it, and depending on the lessons learned, one has to adjust design, and I think this is a learning for all of us. So I don't see it as a pilot.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much. Over to you, Gatendra. Unfortunately, I don't know what happened. We lost the question, so maybe I'll repeat it again. This is question number 3. Is there a role for public institutions and DFI as demand aggregators in the market for green hydrogen offtake agreements? No. The gentleman.
Okay. Hello. Hi, I'm Gajendra Yadav. I'm with Synergy Consulting. We are a financial advisory firm. I'm a director there. Green hydrogen vectors in Synergy. So the question posted to me is there a role for DFIs to bring in the demand aggregator to demand aggregator? So as of now, what we have seen from our personal experience being involved with one of the leading green hydrogen projects is one of the cornerstones for all these projects to succeed is getting a bankable, credible off-taker in place. And that has been the cornerstone for every discussion that we have had with various financing institutions, with various other stakeholders that are keen to looking at these projects. So this is the first puzzle, in our opinion, that needs to be given a due attention, and there has to be an adequate mechanism in place. If there is a growing feeling that there cannot exist a single entity, single country, single buyer who can meet this role, then yes, a role of an aggregator comes into picture. And now the second part of it is that whether DFI should do it. So yes, so I mean most of these aggregators, they'll have to rely on external support from the government in terms of funding being provided for taking this expensive product and replacing their existing use cases with this product. So there has to be some kind of support that comes from public. And in terms of working with them, DFIs, yes, they can definitely play a role in terms of defining the regulations around it, defining the policies around it, as to how these aggregators go on about incentivizing this industry. There shouldn't be too much incentives, and they shouldn't be, like the incentives is needed, especially in the starting of this program, so to get these projects rolling. But there has to be a mechanism put in place as to how this will fade out and how this project should be sufficiently incentivized to make sure that there is enough investment in R&D to bring the cost of these projects down as they go forward, and the role of aggregators keeps on coming down, and we see more of a open market kind of thing coming into picture. There can be a split between, let's say, still these projects are relying on aggregator for some time, but the aim should be that in the long run, this technology should achieve the cost competitiveness, and it should be able to take projects that can survive on a sustainable basis.
Thank you very much. We now have our speaker from Conjuncta, Stefan Liebing, who is joining us, well, actually I don't know from where, but definitely not here in Mauritania. So can you hear us?
Good afternoon. I can hear you well.
Excellent. Thank you. I think maybe we need to turn up our microphones because now there's an echo. But I wanted to ask you from the project side of things. I wanted to turn to question number 4 for you. What are the new kind of financing models that we need to make your project bankable?
I still have a bit of an echo. I hope I can be heard. Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me?
Hear you, but turn off microphones to avoid the echo. So go ahead, please.
All right. So, first of all, let me send my apologies for not being there in person. While we are based in Germany, we spend time in Austria at the moment trying to discuss some important aspects of the projects we have under discussion in Mauritania with leaders from Brussels and from various member states. And if I look out of the window here, I see snow and people skiing. So to be honest, not only weather-wise, but also weather-wise, I would prefer being with you guys in Mauritania. So thanks for having me at least online. We are the new kids on the block, if you wish. Very proud that the government has chosen to work with us on, I think, the 4th project on green hydrogen in country now, where we would form a link to the market, which is quite relevant given ambitious targets and where we stand on the need to substitute some of our gas imports pretty soon. We've teamed up with Infinity Power from Egypt, and we are quite sure that we can work on a successful project together in close coordination with government and society and stakeholders in Mauritania. I look forward to being there in person very soon. I would agree to many things that have been said before by other panelists, and I particularly liked what the gentleman from the African Development Bank said in the beginning. Maybe it is worth looking at how LNG business is developed, and I was in that sector for 10 years of my career. And I think we can learn and derive a lot from that aspect, and therefore maybe we indeed have a limited role of DFIs to play. However, there are a few differences, or maybe something that's comparable with very early stages of LNG markets, and therefore we will need public institutions to get involved a bit more than is the case in gas at the moment. I would see mainly 4 sectors that are of relevance here. One is, of course, offtake. Speaking to off-takers over here, we are pretty sure we can find private off-takers that are bankable and creditworthy to sign long-term agreements to take off green hydrogen from Africa. So that's not the point. However, the point is that we need to break through the chicken and egg that we have in the market at the moment between who is going to produce first and who is going to off-take and build a customer base. So anything that enables us accelerating that process and breaking through that chicken and egg situation is going to help. And we believe that H2 Global, while it's way too small, both in terms of the number of projects it can support and the size of each of the projects that can be covered, H2 Global or the European Hydrogen Bank, this is exactly what we need. Governments need to help or guarantee the formation of off-take vehicles that will accelerate projects. Second, a big difference, I believe, is while we have a lot of the experience on LNG in some of the world's largest and wealthiest companies, it's a bit different for renewable energy. Here, a lot of expertise and the entrepreneurial spirit sits in mid-sized players, mid-sized developers, who might need support when it comes to spending development money. We can at least increase the number of projects that people are working on in parallel by providing support for project preparation and development cost. And I think the paper mentions Africa 50 as a role model here. I think that's right. So let's think how we can replicate that experience from other sectors and use it for the fast-track development of hydrogen pilot projects. Third, the role of ECAs, yes, of course, that cannot be underestimated, but we're also talking about investment guarantees, not just export guarantees. In Germany, we got a special instrument that guarantees for imports of raw materials. That's called an untied financial loan, which is a third foreign trade guaranteeing instrument, if you wish. And that we are currently reworking so that it's also going to be applicable to green hydrogen imports. So we need an expansion of areas covered by investment and export credit guarantees. And also we need to look at some of the conditions and the risk assessments that are in place at the moment, at least across Europe or OECD countries, so that it becomes easier to issue some of these guarantees for states that at the moment are ranked too low in these international rankings. Last but not least, I think there's a fourth aspect that hasn't been mentioned so far, and that is, I think someone said or mentioned Qatar. And I truly believe that the next round of Qatars or Abu Dhabis could be in Africa. So what we do here is also going to contribute to the development of local infrastructure, of wealth, of job creation on the continent. Now, that of course comes with a need for governments to be involved somehow in these projects and to benefit from the exports that are made. So I think the important question is also to look at instruments to finance the involvement of local governments, whether they take a share, as is the case in many LNG projects, or form part in infrastructure or in other ways. We need to look at new forms and innovative forms of financing that involvement of local governments, because I think that's a critical success factor. So let me just stop here. I hope I could mention a few new aspects, although sometimes the tone connection, the voice connection was not too good.
You hear me? Yeah. Thank you so much for your intervention. Excellent contribution. I believe we have some comments from the panel, and then once you have done your comment on your contributions, I'd really like to turn to the audience and see if we can get some feedback from them as well.
Thank you very much, Tove. I just want to re-emphasize the importance of pricing signals and market making. So if you take the example of solar, how did solar develop? Germany was a big part of that because of the subsidies that were introduced in Europe. And Germany actually led that effort. But who were the biggest beneficiaries? It was China. It was Chinese, because they were able to mobilize their manufacturing expertise, the fact that they had low access to very cheap electricity, actually most of it being coal, to produce the cheapest solar panels in the world. And now China controls about 98% of the market for polysilicon in the world, because the pricing signal was there and China was smart enough to take advantage of that opportunity. That's what African countries need to do, because the biggest polluting countries who need to decarbonize fast are those countries who will need this hydrogen the most. But we need to position ourselves to become the next Qatars of the world and take advantage of the opportunity. Once the market is there, financing will flow. And the financing will come from institutional investors. It's not so much the cost of capital issue, because if you have very strong off-takers, I go back to the LNG projects. We've financed projects in Nigeria, in Mozambique, and others. The cost of financing is different if you have solid off-takers who are paying in hard currency. That cost will match the opportunities that are in other places, as long as you can secure your production. Obviously, you need to have peace in the country. So we need to take advantage of those pricing signals. And the other things are, even the role of the World Trade Organization. One of the reasons why China and others were able to take advantage of export opportunities was they were allowed access into WTO. And as a result, you had the greatest shift of wealth from west to east that the world has ever seen in the fastest possible time. So you need to create such conditions that allow African countries to be able to play in the global economy. And those are the things that need to be done. And African countries have to position themselves through building capacity to make sure they can take advantage of these opportunities. So let me stop there.
Thank you. And that's where the African Development Bank comes in, right?
I just want to come back to perhaps three points, and indeed building on what was just said. Indeed, I think it's critical that countries such as Mauritania, other potential green hydrogen producers in Africa, have long-term national strategies to develop their economies, to position themselves to be major players in that new industry. So this is about industrialization. It's about countries determining where they play and what they want to do in that value chain. And I like your reference to Qatar. I mean, I would like nothing more than to be able to come back 20 years from now and see Mauritania having greatly benefited from that industry. The second point to make, though, is that I think, and this was referred to as well, we need to have a phased approach. The phased approach at the project level, in that we're not going to build 30 gigawatts in 3 years. We need to think, communicate, and enlist the support of different stakeholders, including industrial partners, to be able to develop this in phases, though there will be very significant scaling up at some point. But I think it's important in the next, say, 3 to 5 years to deliver on first phases that prove that this is viable economically and attractive globally. And third, I think the DFIs and the financial community need to come along, and this is something to be worked on together to develop a phased strategy towards mobilizing finance. So it's not as if we need hundreds of billions of capital today. We may need them in 10, 15 years' time, but what we need to do is think today as to how we're going to get the first few billions, and then the next 10 billions, and then eventually the hundreds of billions that are needed in the long term.
Yeah, I agree. If we look at how industries develop, is they develop over time. And what's most important in getting for any country to succeed in establishing or starting a new industry is to give these confidence to the various stakeholders. So over here, if Africa were to take the front stage on the green hydrogen development, then they need to send the signal that they are willing to step up. They are willing to provide the right kind of environment in terms of policies and regulations. And this can be implemented by taking stepwise manner, phase-wise approach. So as the confidence builds, more and more players come, the cost of capital, everything gets accordingly adjusted. And I think that's one of the way to develop industry to the levels that we are seeing being talked about today.
Can they hear me now, the interpreters? Okay, I'm sorry about that. Okay, anyone from the floor interested in commenting on what you have just heard from the panel, or on whether the recommendations are correct, incorrect, or we're missing something? We will send around the microphone if somebody would like to comment. Okay. Maybe I'll step down for you.
Thank you very much. So one of the recommendations is about increased co-financing, and two of the speakers were talking about how use large projects and some of the benefits some of the benefits of export for co-financing other, regional developments. So perhaps you can elaborate a little bit more, how would that look like? How can that look like?
So I think one of the key things that we should distinguish is projects where you have hard currency revenues from exports, and projects that depend on internal revenues in local currency. When we're selling into local markets, there you are depending on local currency income in a lot of the times. And there, DFIs have a stronger role to play because you have to provide some credit enhancement. Sometimes there's currency mismatch where you're financing your infrastructure in hard currency and your revenues are coming in local currency. And at times you need to create credit enhancement mechanisms to allow those deals to be bankable. But the opportunity is where the countries can raise the resources from exports to invest in local infrastructure, and then in relation to some countries that are already using hydrogen, maybe they're using gray hydrogen, they're just replacing the gray hydrogen with green hydrogen. So South Africa is an example where there's already a manufacturing sector. And there you can also co-finance with local banks because you're talking about the domestic economy. The role of the DFI there is just to act as a trigger to crowd in the other, particularly local banks, who may even want to finance in local currency, for instance, where the produce is being sold within local markets. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the floor?
Thank you. I'm Mr. Hassan Amberi. I'm a consultant in the oil and gas and energy sector. My question is, I would like to know if there is already thinking about setting up a dedicated or specific financing mechanism to support the African hydrogen, green hydrogen alliances countries. Like, we know Europe has already its own hydrogen bank, we can say it like that. My question is, how to think to support the green hydrogen potentials in African countries? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe I start by outlining what's happening at the moment and what support is ongoing. There is, at the one hand, supporting the enabling environment that you also mentioned, which is around policy development, strategic development, and capacity building, but also supporting capital investments into developing concrete projects. That includes contributing to development finance, contributing to the CapEx, to the project financing, through investment grants, the classical blending. So there is already support ongoing. So this is on this side. with the Hydrogen Bank, I think that we'll see a new and very important additional elements to this. Better coordination also, or strengthened coordination of the financing instruments. We have guarantees that de-risk investments. So there's a wide range of instruments that allows to cover the various elements and challenges in hydrogen projects.
If I can just add, I think it's a very important question, and I think there's two parts to it in my view. One is what you just said, Thomas, which is the support of the nascent markets by the end users, be it European industrial groups, being other buyers of green hydrogen, ammonia, or indeed steel manufacturers. And that, as you said, is happening. Perhaps that needs to happen at a bigger scale, but it is already a good start. I think the other component is to look at financing support, which is different from markets signaling support and those volume enhancing. And financing support is, as I suggested earlier, in my view, about pulling capital that exists already and then thinking of ways of scaling it up to mobilize eventually private capital.
Just to add to that, you know, the financing vehicle already exists. The African Development Bank was created by the African countries to finance infrastructure and projects. So we already exist. And that's why I'm here today, because we are going to be financing or mobilizing financing for hydrogen projects for AGA countries and non-AGA countries, for all African countries. Where those projects are viable and bankable, we will support. We'll support them if the support is required.
Anyone else? Okay, we'll take, we have two questions. Okay, you want to use this one? We'll have to run back and forth.
Thank you. I'm Mohamed Dieye. I'm a consultant also, and also a member of the Mining and Petroleum Chamber. Mohamed Dieye speaking. I would like to ask you if maybe the question is not very not to be asked here, but I'm not sure if it's the right place to ask it. But I would like to know if in this blend there is a place, or is it possible to use these green funds, carbon credits, and things like this? Are they eligible? Are there things for the private, this kind of private projects? Are there funds also for in this in credit carbon credits and wind fund, etc.? Thank you.
Bonjour, je poserai ma question en français. Je m'appelle Mohamed El Foudaï, je suis enseignant universitaire. Vous avez parlé dans les recommandations, Monsieur Wal Shoniba, de la Banque africaine de développement, Donc vous avez parlé parmi vos recommandations de mutualiser des infrastructures entre les pays. Vu que l'hydrogène est une technologie nouvelle et ça demande beaucoup de préparation en termes de ressources humaines pour pouvoir accueillir ces projets d'infrastructure. Est-ce qu'au niveau de la Banque africaine de développement, il y a déjà des projets ou des financements orientés pour la préparation des ressources humaines qualifiées, pour financer des universités vraiment de grande taille régionale, commune entre des pays AGA ou plusieurs pays pour former les ressources humaines et pour héberger les technologies localement, les technologies et le savoir-faire nécessaires pour accueillir ces projets d'hydrogène. Je vous remercie.
Okay, merci beaucoup. Je me présente Edouard Ndong du ministère du Pétrole et des Énergies au niveau du Sénégal. Alors, j'avais une question concernant les privés locaux. Aujourd'hui, on parle de développement de produits hydrogène à partir au niveau des États, mais le privé pourrait avoir une participation qui va corréler avec les objectifs de développement durable. C'est-à-dire aujourd'hui, si le cadre réglementaire au niveau CEDEAO est déjà établi, un privé pour mettre en place un projet d'hydrogène et travailler directement avec des pays étrangers. Et dans ce cas-là, les privés locaux rencontrent des difficultés pour être assurés et bénéficier des financements qui proviennent d'autres banques, des banques étrangères. Alors ma question c'est comment on pourrait assurer ces privés locaux sans pour autant passer au niveau étatique pour qu'ils puissent développer des projets hydrogène et entrer directement en collaboration avec les pays étrangers. Merci.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'm going to just ask one more question myself, and then we have about, I don't know, 5-10 minutes to wrap up if they allow us. Oh, there's one more over here? Okay. But I just want, and I think I'm going to put you on the spot here because I hear a lot of questions to the DFIs, etc. And I'm wondering, in terms of the recommendations that we have made, that the DFIs need to collaborate more closely, they need to pool their resources, they maybe should create a platform, all of these things that we have heard from our stakeholders. And I would just like to put you on the spot and say, what is the African Development Bank doing in this regard to meet these demands? Because clearly people are going to ask a lot from you. Oh, sorry. You heard nothing? Should I start from the beginning? So anyway, I have a question to the, well, you will answer my questions and you will understand what I asked. But any other questions from the floor before I hand over to the...
Thank you very much. My name is Abraham Shaw from Ethiopia. Thank you, Professor Stefan, joining us virtually from Germany. I have been with him just a week before for the BTD conference in Germany. So just, I'm representing the federal government of Ministry of Water and Energy of Ethiopia. We are supposed to have the very high potential of renewable energy sources, including the green hydrogen energy. So we, as government of Ethiopia, we are currently developing our strategy and working around and looking, to learn more from Mauritania. My minister have been discussing a very high-level ministerial discussion with His Excellency Minister Salah many times in many conferences. And we are hearing from South Africa, from Kenya, from Morocco. They are ahead of others in this green hydrogen technology. So my question is just for the panel. What do you expect for federal government to do as government, on top of creating enabling environment, including policies and strategies, and sharing, the de-risk of projects or, these technology initiatives. We have the potential of, solar energies or wind energy, geothermal energy, and the hydropower energy. In Ethiopia, of course, we have more than 90% of electrification generated from hydropower, and we have many more potentials. But the areas around the solar and wind energy is not tapped so far at the maximum level. Ethiopia is supposed to be a country of 13 months sunshine, and without exhausting the potential capacity from solar and wind, we are again looking into the technologies around the green hydrogen energy for generating green ammonia as well as green energy, the green hydrogen energy. So what do we really expect from a federal government to do for developers or investment companies to dive in and to come in and to invest? Thank you.
Well, thank you. So I think we need to wrap up here so we can answer the questions. So I see that you have all taken notes, so I'll let you go first, and then we'll just go through and hope that we can answer all the questions.
Okay, I'll try to be brief. When it comes to the hydrogen industry, I think it's well worth breaking it down, because there are several aspects to it. So you have the renewable energy, you have the electrolyzer where you're splitting out the hydrogen, and then you have the hydrogen derivatives, the industrial applications, whether it's green steel, green ammonia, et cetera, right? And as a matter of course, we as a bank, we're supporting all of these sectors anyway. I mean, the new bit is the electrolyzer, but that we have a massive program to support the rollout of renewable energy across the continent. Even in this part of the world, we have what we call our Desert to Power program, which is across 11 countries of the Sahel. It's a $20 billion program to create the world's largest solar zone across the Sahel. And so we're already financing these projects, the solar projects, the wind. The bank financed the largest wind farm in Africa. That's in Kenya, Lake Turkana. We're involved in the Ben-Ban projects in Egypt and others. So that work is already ongoing. And countries can do whatever they like with that solar power. You can sell it, use it to produce green hydrogen, or you can sell it into the local grid. As long as it's bankable, we'll finance it. But in relation to energy transition in particular, we have the Africa Energy Transition Catalyst Program, where we're providing technical assistance to countries. And that's one of the reasons why we're having this dialogue with other countries and other countries who have green hydrogen ambitions to find out what it is they want. And we're also working with other DFIs so that we don't reinvent the wheel. And that's an ongoing process to identify what the country's needs are. Now we're hearing capacity building and training. The bank in the past has supported that work, creating centers of excellence for training across the continent. So that's probably an initiative that we will roll out for green hydrogen in due course. And in terms of Ethiopia, we're financing geothermal, which is also green in Ethiopia and Kenya. And we've financed, hydros and other renewable energy projects. Lastly, on the carbon, I think there's a Green Climate Fund there, and we're also looking at carbon markets, which are applicable for renewable energy projects anyway, and other projects that seek to remove carbon emissions. So all of these things have to be properly packaged to make these projects viable. Thank you.
Just ask Stefan if you wanted to come in as well. So we don't leave you behind. Is there anything you want to add to this?
I couldn't hear everything, so let's see if I can respond to some of the questions. Maybe since I was addressed personally on Ethiopia, which in fact is something that that is true for many other countries that are now looking at hydrogen. I mean, I'm not in the business of recommending anything to the government, but I believe I would recommend you do what you started doing in Berlin with your minister and what you are doing today, and that is reaching out to potential investors. And maybe what would be useful is to have some of the basics available so that they can come and have a look and see if the givens, the environment, the technical criteria are good enough. And I'm sure everybody in the room is going to support and will be willing to help in their different capacities. I think when it comes to the paper that we started the discussion with, as I said before, I think I would agree most of the statements, and I think it's now for us to make use of this conference today and communicate this widely and use all of our influence with various governments and decision makers to get some of these things going. And I believe for this, the panel was very helpful to get different perspectives and to see what needs to come next. And this, as I said before, must include some clear perspective for local involvement in some of these projects.
Thank you so much.
I just want to perhaps come back to the point about the role of governments in this context. I think I would emphasize three aspects, which is not specific to green hydrogen, but is proven to be important issues when developing various energy transition areas in other countries. One is the setup of regulatory regimes, which essentially set the rule of the game, through which international investors, developers will be involved. And importantly, the allocation of the future economic rent that will be generated by these investments and these projects between the government and the private sector. The second is to define and identify what roles the government, either directly or through its national state-owned entities, want to play. And it obviously can be in relation to the development of enabling infrastructure, but it can be also in terms of promoting certain industry. I'm thinking obviously of the iron ore and steel industry in this context. And then the third one, having defined what role governments want to play, is thinking about how you're going to mobilize finance to fund your share of the roles, so to speak. That can be through, obviously, international loans, World Bank, for example, could be through international capital markets, or it can be through commercial arrangements with international developers that will participate in the development of these projects. But all of that needs to be thought through in advance to embark on a successful implementation of a new sector.
I think if we look at the current dynamics, I mean, there are sufficient projects being announced across the world. And the key question that comes to every developer's mind is, which are the countries which give me the best economies of scale when it comes to selling the final product? So this single question is what is determining decisions being made by which geography to go to by most of the developers. And with this question in your ultimate objective is to give the best environment for the developers to reach one of the most economical price on the factors that government can control, should be you can say the thought process that government needs to start thinking towards to attract the private capital and private developers. And like Alex said, I mean, it starts with how do you optimize the cost of land? Do you charge for the land cost during the development period when developers are a bit, you can say, tight on the capital that they have? How do we structure this thing and try to push it towards the period in which we are actually generating the revenue? So how do we structure the cost of the land to move towards the generation period rather than charging it upfront. Second thing is, what are the sites that you're offering? Are they one of the best sites that the country has to offer? Because at the end of the day, that will determine the final cost of product coming out of that particular country. So that's another question they need to ask. So that is the government willing to invite developers to one of the most renewable friendly sites? And third thing is, there should be a long-term plan, especially in relation to the common infrastructure, because that can really help bring down the cost of developing these projects for the initial few investors. So if there is a concrete plan of developing the common structure and distributing that cost across various private players, then that can definitely bring down the cost of final product and look more attractive to the incoming investors.
Thank you so much, everyone who has participated. I think the fact that we went over time means that you probably found this a bit interesting. But I'd really like to thank the distinguished panel, and maybe we can give them a big applaud for their contribution.
Into project specifics, really get into the challenges and difficulties we're facing in implementation, and try to discover some solutions that we might start to explore. So again, I want to steer us away from buzzwords, from blur words, and really get as deep and gritty as we can. Quickly, hello everyone. My name is TJ Kirk. I am a manager at what was formerly Institute, now just RMI. I'm also one of the people that helps organize the Green Hydrogen Catapult, which is a coalition of hydrogen developers and end users trying to accelerate the deployment of green hydrogen globally to 5 gigawatts by 2027 for our members. And in my day job at RMI, I'm also one of the advisors to a hydrogen hub in the US in the center of the US. So, enough about me. I also want to thank all of our hosts, Green Hydrogen Organization for putting on the event, our Canadian government for helping us to host this, and everyone else to help make this event possible. So to kick things off, I want to give our panel, who I'm joined by Dr. Stephen Kaufman, a hydrogen executive advisor to the board of ThyssenKrupp, Omar Jabri, Director of Project Development for West Central and North Africa for EMEA Power, and Terry Leperc, founder and president of HyDeal, a chance to introduce themselves in their own words. So I'll ask all of my panelists to give a quick intro to themselves, what they do, and if they have any active projects here in Africa that they are really proud of at the moment. So, Dr. Kaufman.
Yes, good evening from my side. So I'm representing the board of Green Age organization today, and also ThyssenKrupp. So ThyssenKrupp is in the center of the green transformation, maybe not only in Germany, but also globally. You may know that we are running the biggest steel plant in Europe, in Duisburg, with production of 12 million tons of steel a year and 20 million tons of CO2 emissions. So we decided to replace our first furnace by a direct reduction plant, starting now the construction of the plant. And in 2026, 2027, we will run this first plant then with green or maybe blue hydrogen, reducing 3.5 million tons of CO2 a year, producing 2.5 million tons of green steel a year, starting from 2027 in Duisburg. And the demand is around 150,000 tons of green hydrogen a year. That makes us to one of the biggest off-takers in Europe at this time. That is the one point. The other point, ThyssenKrupp is having a business named UDE, so we are planning world's biggest ammonia and methanol plants with 1 million tons of outcome a year. And we have also another business, ThyssenKrupp Nucera. We are building electrolyzers on a big scale. So we are a partner of Air Products in the NEOM project in Saudi Arabia, building a 2 gigawatt electrolyzer before 2026. Also with Shell in Rotterdam, a 200 megawatt electrolyzer on an alkalic electrolyzer base. So that is what we are doing with ThyssenKrupp. So we are really concrete in what we are doing in the green transformation. And maybe I can talk later a little bit about what I'm doing in my former position as Commissioner of the Federal Government in Western Africa, and what we are doing there for the hydrogen economy.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here. Thank you first for the organizers and for inviting EMEA Power. So I'm Omar Jabri. I'm in charge of developing large utility scale IPP projects in West, Central, and North Africa, based out of Morocco. So EMEA Power is a renewable energy developer, developing IPP in Africa and Asia, with a focus mainly on present in many African countries, mainly on solar, wind, and battery storage projects. But we are also active on desalination projects, on hydrogen projects, green ammonia projects. On green hydrogen and green ammonia, we have projects in Egypt, in Djibouti, in Morocco, and we aim also to expand our footprint to Mauritania, where we are already committed to develop renewable solar and wind projects. Thank you.
Thierry Lebec, founder of Hydeal. Hydeal is the promoter of Europe's largest green hydrogen project right now. It's a 9.5 gigawatt solar, 7.4 gigawatt electrolyzer project, which is now finalizing its feasibility study. It's bringing together a steelmaker, ArcelorMittal, with the metrics are more or less the same, which was mentioned. We're talking about 150,000 tons of hydrogen to be supplied to ArcelorMittal in northern Spain to produce 2.3 million tons of green steel by then. The project also brings together Fertiberia, which is Southern Europe's largest fertilizer company, with the aiming at producing large quantities of green ammonia to be used in their fertilizer plant in northern Spain. We're also backed by Enagas, and this is what is original in our project. It's a downstream-oriented project with a upstream and midstream integration. So we have DHU Energy, which is a developer, which has secured about 6,000 hectares of land in northern Spain, which is currently being permitted, and Enagas, which is the gas transmission company of Spain, which is right now working on the engineering and construction of 350 kilometers of pipelines, which will connect the solar hydrogen project in northern Spain to the end users in Asturias, in that industrial region on the coast of northern coast of Spain. So why Africa? For the last year or so, we've been working with my good friend Mohamed with the Mauritanian government, and I want to salute Ismail Veta and his visionary work, and Minister Saleh and his own vision on how to implement the same approach, integrated upstream, midstream, downstream approach here in Mauritania. I think we'll discuss that, so I won't say too much about how we plan to do it. Just a word, we've co-engineered and initiated an initiative by the European Investment Bank, the International Solar Alliance, based in Delhi, 120 countries, the African Union, of a study which was presented in Sharm el-Sheikh at the Mauritania Pavilion that was back in November, and which was again presented by the European Commission and with the European Commission and the European Investment Bank in Brussels in March, of a vision of 50 million tons of hydrogen by 2035, including 25 million tons from Morocco and Mauritania. Now the big question is, how do we do it? But I guess that's going to be part of our panel, how we do make this incredible ambition a reality.
Thank you. And to kind of build off of what Terry was just teeing up already there, we kind of want to get into some more of the project specifics with the project developer and supplier lens here. So for the project developer hat side, and starting actually with you, Terry, we'll go from the end backwards, building off of Jonas's speech at the beginning, as much as this is about financing, de-risking is just as important. So what do you need to de-risk the projects that you're working on? How important are sovereign guarantees in this de-risking? And have you identified off-takers for the projects that you're developing? As much as we have a belief that if we build projects, we can find off-takers easily for the hydrogen we're producing, I think it's really important that we start to identify those off-takers early instead of clear value for the product that we're making. So, Terry, I take it to you first, and if I need to repeat anything, let me know.
Yeah, I'm going to say something revolutionary. There's no business without clients. I mean, this is an idea that is very scarce in the mindset of, the renewable energy business. I'm from it, so, and especially hydrogen. People in hydrogen don't look for customers. They're looking for governments, for this, for that, etc. Now start with customers. What do customers want? Volumes, prices, deliveries. And by the way, this is what we've done for Hydel. Anybody who thinks any project can be financed without a customer, and when I mean a customer, it's a 20-year offtake contract, a bankable one, is dreaming. Now, we've heard about everything that is done right now with DFIs and the rest. What is the likelihood of funding 100 billion euros of projects here in Mauritania, just like this, with Mauritania? The likelihood is zero. It won't happen. Who will, I mean, no offense, but it's 12 times the size of the Mauritanian economy. Nobody's going to put 100 billion in this country without having a bigger plan. And the good news is the Mauritanian government has that vision of a bigger plan, which says it's a systemic vision. It's not just, hey, we're doing a small business. We're doing something transformational. So my first message, and then I guess we'll elaborate on that, would be to say, how do you structure the offtake? And let's be reasonable. I mean, the offtake here must be Mauritanian, that's for sure. Industrialization is paramount, as was mentioned by several panel members before. But nothing will happen, and de-risking is ultimately selling to a willing customer at a market price. Anybody who thinks that somebody is going to put in the middle and that somebody is a guarantee scheme or sovereign this. By the way, sovereign guarantees read the Financial Times today. It's sovereign guarantees. Half of African countries right now are in financial distress. You don't want this to happen here. And I have advice for the Mauritanian government. Don't give any sovereign guarantee. You have plenty of assets. Actually, you are sitting on top of hundreds of billions of assets, and those assets are your land. Leverage those assets. Bring foreign investment on top of those assets. Don't take 1 cent of debt on the sovereign level. That is like fentanyl. It's good for a while, and then it gets you to an unpleasant situation. So the message here very clearly is how you built a very strong, extremely powerful offtake structure. And that thing, in our opinion, and we'll have time to discuss that, works because you have bankable offtakers. I mean, that sounds bizarre to say in order to have something bankable, you have long-term bankable offtakers. Companies that are willing, that have balance sheets that can show that, yes, they will deliver and pay for the product for the next 20 years. And that's what bankers want. And in order for that to happen, you need to reach those customers. And this is why infrastructure comes in. And we have a very strong conviction. Without a pipeline, and we'll get to that, without a pipeline connecting Mauritania, Morocco, and Europe, nothing, zero will be built here. That's as simple as that. Because you will not build, or so little, I mean, you will not build 100 billion euros, which you should, build in this country without having off-takers based in Europe or other geographies, but Europe is, after all, next door. That's a good thing about this country. It's quite close to Europe. And you want to have those off-takers. And the good news is that they're screaming for it. Europe today has said, we want 20 million tons of hydrogen by 2030, including 10 million tons of imports. Where do you think those 10 million tons of imports are going to come from? I mean, not from Russia, not from Afghanistan. It's going to come from, a large portion of it is going to come from North Africa. And this is where there is a unique opportunity, but let's think offtake. For me, finance equals offtake, offtake equals finance.
Thank you, Terry, for the hot takes there and the good opinion. Omar, I'd love to hear your response as well to this.
Thank you very much, Thomas. I fully agree with Terry on actually that the financing is completely tied to an offtake. The issue indeed is, and this is coming also from the discussion we are having with some off-takers on our green hydrogen project, green ammonia project, is that off-takers don't want to be bound by a long-term contract, they want flexibility on volume. Yeah, sorry. They want also flexibility on volumes, and finally this makes the project somehow non-bankable. So that's the real issue today, is how to secure would somehow give a kind of confidence to lenders about the revenue of the project. That's the real issue. And Thomas, you spoke about sovereign guarantees. I would rather say how government could help somehow on this. If we take, for example, Morocco. Morocco, they are using 2 million tons of green ammonia, importing actually 2 million tons of green ammonia for fertilizers production. So the government can play a role and somehow help in making those projects bankable by being somehow in the middle as the off-taker of this green ammonia and securing somehow this long-term contract that makes the project bankable. Same here in Mauritania. We can think about the green steel that was mentioned before this morning. Mauritanian government can also play a role to make somehow this project bankable, and without very solid companies, most probably European companies or government, it's really complicated to get the offtake that would make those projects bankable.
Dr. Kaufman, would you like to comment on this as well? Or additionally, you could comment more on what are the risks from the supply chain angle?
No, I want to comment something about infrastructure and about the prices. So you talked about what is the off-taker asking for, volumes and fixed prices and flexibility. So when we talk to suppliers about 25 years off-take agreements, it is not really, that is not what we really looking for. Maybe 10 years and then another 10 years with flexible prices, but 25 years agreement with fixed prices is not really, And talking about infrastructure, I think the big chance for Northern and Western African, also Northern European countries, is a pipeline infrastructure. You know, maybe Germany, we have an agreement with Australia, we are talking to Canada, we are talking to Colombia, a lot of countries in this world. But we have to ship the hydrogen as ammonia, and we have to have the crackers in Rotterdam and Wilhelmshaven, wherever then. And there is no cracker so far with a capacity of 500 megawatt or maybe 1 gigawatt. We have to build it, they have to run. So at the end, the faster Africa or Northern Europe is building pipelines to Germany, to Central Europe, the better it is the market position. And I think that is really a big opportunity for Africa, because of distance for 3,000 kilometers, a pipeline is more effective at the end than ammonia shipping and cracking. So, and for sure, the infrastructure is the biggest topic also for ThyssenKrupp in Duisburg. We have only 40 kilometers from the plant to Rotterdam, so we think we can manage to build in a pipeline before 26, 27, but also this is complicated. German law and who will pay for it and all these things. So, and then we're talking about 50 kilometers away from the coastline. My home city is Stuttgart. It's the southern part of Germany, Central Europe, like Austria, like Czechoslovakia, Czechia, and so on. How can we get the hydrogen there? There's a lot of industry there, cement industry, car, and so on. So we have to bring the hydrogen not only to the coastline, we have to bring it to Central Europe. And that is a really big challenge. And nobody is clear how it will pay for that at the moment.
And a common theme I've heard throughout today and in this panel especially is on the need for infrastructure. So I'd love to dive in a little bit on the pipeline that's been mentioned and the need for pipelines. What are the respective roles of government, industry, and financiers in building this pipeline? And I heard one timeline thrown out about 26, 27 for an initial pipeline. What is kind of realistic and doable versus what is necessary to advance, the needs of the hydrogen industry?
We have a model. Nord Stream 2, wonderful installation. It was built in 3 years. People don't realize how fast you can develop and build a pipeline, provided you have the permitting issues solved. Now, if you want to build a pipeline a new pipeline through Spain, for instance, and ask permitting permission to 1,000 farmers, it will probably take you. If you're doing what Heidel is doing together with Enagas, which is just looking at the existing pipeline network and building those pipelines next to the existing pipelines, we're talking about 3 years. In 3 years' time, Enagas will have built the first portion of what it has announced 2 months ago, that it will build 4,000 kilometers of pipelines by 2030 in Spain, and connecting to Morocco and hopefully Mauritania soon, and then to France with that so-called H2Med project. These things can be built fast, and provided, obviously, there's a business model. But you wouldn't imagine how cheap, excuse my French, fucking cheap, the transmission is in Spain. We're talking about, our product is going to be priced at 2.5 euros per kilogram, ideal product at production level. We're talking about 5 to 10 cents, adding 5 to 10 cents on the transmission side, and a little more for storage if we want to do underground storage for it. The message here is that transmission, and Stefan said it, you know, it's immeasurably cheaper. It's about 15 times cheaper to ship the product through a pipeline than it is to with a ship under the form of ammonia that you break breaking the molecule. So the business model is extremely attractive, and provided you have political will, and we have this political will where? Here in Mauritania, the government fully supports that. We have this political will in a way in Morocco as well, if you look at the admittedly natural gas pipeline, but map which was shown by Onim and Amina Ben Khadra here in Nouakchott a few months ago. So the pipeline issues there, and then Spain is moving to these pipelines, France is moving to the pipelines, and guess what? Germany wants the product, like real fast. So the question is, how fast can we go if we build those pipelines and start the pipelines from here, or even further south, to Berlin? Now, I was asked a few months ago, what is that, at a BMBF conference in Berlin. So one is the Mauritanian hydrogen coming to Berlin. And I was a bit over-optimistic, I said 2027. But I could say, if we aim at, let's be reasonable, 2030, by 2030, we can supply millions of tons, let's put it that way, millions of tons from here to Germany. And this should be our industry objective. This is something where it's not just one developer doing it and the rest, or it's government versus thing. It's everyone together, DFIs as well, etc. It's a common project. And we presented it with the Mauritanian government to the European Commission a month ago, and guess what? The European Commission says, show me this thing. I'm going to back it. So yes, there is immense support in Berlin, in Brussels, in Paris it's another story. But for this, most importantly, industry is clamoring for it. And finance is ready. All these infrastructure funds in the world are ready, or at least some of them, are ready to, including in the Arab world. And let's not forget the Arab world. The Arab world is looking at this and saying, what about this model? And when I see the Arab world, I'm talking even large companies. We have, for instance, very interesting discussions with Saudi Aramco, which is saying, hey, why not doing it as well in our part of the world? So yes, let's go for it. It's not just a theoretical discussion. If we can say that here in Nouakchott on April 13th, 2023, an initiative was born that says, yes, let's build the damn thing, and let's build it fast, and everybody will be happy. I mean, I'm sure BP, CWP, and the rest will be jumping of joy if suddenly they can access customers with a minimal cost, who will be ready, yes, to sign those 10-year, 15 years, 20-year contracts, and this is what we want to get. But infrastructures, then again, is the key.
Thank you, Terry. Omar, would you like to comment as well on this?
Yes, I fully agree again. I mean, on the transportation, we all know that green hydrogen cannot be easily transported. That's why we think about ammonia. And of course, if there is the infrastructure, the pipeline that connects the production sites to the customers, that would definitely help in making those projects bankable and doable. Now, of course, it needs to be, I agree, a common product of government, developers, and customers, and also the discussion about at what price needs to be definitely also evaluated.
Thank you. Dr. Kaufman, any thoughts on this? Otherwise, I have a separate question for you. So from the ThyssenKrupp perspective, what do you need to see from developers in order to scale up the manufacturing and production of equipment, to have the security you need to really ramp up electrolyzer and other equipment supplies?
Yeah, so at the moment, it's a worldwide bottleneck, the capacity of electrolyzer production. So at ThyssenKrupp, we have at the moment maybe 1 gigawatt a year, and we want to scale up to 3 and then to 5. But for sure, we have reducing costs by ramping up the production. We have to look on the material side. So raw material for the alkalic electrolyzers is not so much a problem because we need at most nickel and platinum that is available, but we have to look for the skills, for a good workforce then. If we plan to go with our production abroad, at the moment we're producing, at the end, all what we're producing is in Germany and in Italy. So, but we have requests from all over the world every day nearly. So our problem is really not to find the right developer. Our problem is which markets we will focus on. So, and in this sense, it's also interesting and maybe necessary to look for state subsidies. For sure, if you build a new electrolyzer plant somewhere in the world, it will be helpful if there are some CAPEX subsidies. So we are talking to Canada, talking to the United States, for example. I talked about Australia. So for the moment, we don't have plans, as you asked before, for production sites and also not for projects in Africa, to be honest. Also not in Latin America, and also not in India. So India is also a very big market, but we don't have the capacities right now. We have to ramp up our manufacturing, and that is not that easy, to be honest. It's still a lot of handmade work, electrolyzer, and so we are looking where we can focus, to which markets we can focus.
Thank you. And I have a long list of questions I will not have time to get through on here, but I also wanted to give a chance for folks in the audience to ask any questions that they might have regarding any of the opinions that have been voiced or any other further questions for the folks on stage. And I'm hoping that Ines or someone from the Green Hydrogen Organization can help me out to be a microphone runner again, though I do not see her at the moment. Oh, thank you, Joyce. And any questions right now? I see one hand up.
Thank you. It's a question to Dr. Kaufman. Dr. Kaufman, in your earlier talk, you said that you were putting up 2 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity for NEOM in Saudi Arabia. Can you give us a bit more detail? Are those PEM electrolyzers, alkaline, a combination of both?
No, we are only doing alkaline electrolyzers. So we are coming from the ammonia production. So we have experience of 60 years ammonia production for fertilizer industry. And now we build a startup out of ThyssenKrupp Ude, which is ThyssenKrupp Nucera, but we are only focusing on alkaline electrolyzers. So, which it's cheaper, which is more robust. I don't want to talk about, it's not a competition between the technologies. We need all technologies. We need all PEM electrolyzers, high temperature electrolyzers. We need all what we can have for the challenges of the global hydrogen economy. So, but we are focusing on alkaline electrolyzers.
Sorry, Dr. Kaufman, just a follow-on question, and maybe anyone up there can answer it. Do we know globally now what the largest electrolyzer installed capacity is today?
We have a 20 megawatt electrolyzer in Spain with Yehdef. We have a 20 megawatt electrolyzer in Quebec. The Chinese told us that they have a 250 megawatt electrolyzer running. I haven't seen it, so but I think it's correct. And then we have some projects in production, like the Shell 200 megawatt electrolyzer in Rotterdam, and some other projects around 100 to 200 megawatt. That's what my knowledge is.
Thank you.
I think earlier it was touched on the importance of getting the off-taker right, and I think I see two divergent views. Obviously from the developer side, the ask is 20-25 years, and I think we heard Dr. Kaufman saying that he won't go beyond 10 years. So may I know what is the biggest hurdle for the off-takers to go to the long-term duration?
I can talk about ThyssenKrupp Steel. We are talking now, or we have negotiations with around 8 suppliers at the moment. So nothing is fixed so far. So in between is Shell, is BP, is Equinor for blue hydrogen. And they are still in negotiations. So I'm not part of the negotiation team, so I can't, that's why I can't go that much into details. But for sure you need flexibility after 10 years because the prices will decrease for sure. So 25 years is not, yeah, it's not, I'm looking for the English word, sorry. Machbar, yeah.
I have a question about the pipeline for Thierry, if I may. Actually, a few questions. What is the proposed economic model of that pipeline? Namely, who would own it? How would the capacity rights be allocated? And to what extent, or when do you start planning for it or taking FID in relation to having off-take agreements between suppliers, say in Mauritania and Morocco, and off-takers, say, in Germany? So how do you address that chicken and egg situation? And last but not least, how do you finance it? But that's probably quite easy once you've answered the first two questions.
Yeah, I think you're pointing to the difficulty here is the chicken and egg. And this is what we have, the way we're addressing it with HyDeal is to bring in the same company upstream, midstream, and downstream. So that when we're negotiating, for instance, the pipeline engineering, it's absolutely matched with the development planning, for instance, on the DRI by ArcelorMittal, which just got announced that it got 500 million euros of subsidies from the Spanish government to build it. So and then obviously backed on the timing on the supply of the hydrogen with the permitting of the project and the supply of the electrolyzers. I just would like to mention one thing. Very few people understand that what we need is to supply hundreds of gigawatts of electrolyzers fast. And ThyssenKrupp is showing the way in Europe, but the rest of the field in Europe is, I'd say, underwhelming in terms of scale, etc. And I'm going to use the C word. What we have right now is a very Western-oriented. I mean, we're in Africa, we're talking about Africa, but let's not forget that this is going to be a global industry. And right now, there are hundreds of gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity which are being ramped up in China itself. So it's a fundamental element. Our vision of things, getting back to your question, Alexandre, is that you first have to start with the customers. The customers, if you have willing customers, and customers, as Stefan says, come with a price. If you have a price which is too high, no customer will commit. So Stefan hasn't told us what price he wants for his hydrogen, but I imagine it can't be lower than what ArcelorMittal wants because that's but these guys want super low prices. And by the way, the European Commission came up with a vision where they're saying green hydrogen should be at 2 euros per kilogram by 2030. That gives us a ballpark, 2.5, to which you add the transmission cost. So that's roughly where we are. Provided you're at that level, you're competing with LNG in Europe with a decent carbon value. And then the market opens and it's endless. We're talking about potentially hundreds of millions of tons, which is not just industry, it's also in mobility, by the way, we're cheaper than diesel.
You can be as well cheaper than natural gas in the production of power, for instance. And we're working on such applications. So it's binary. If you have the volumes and the prices, the customers will come your way. And whether that's 10-year or 20-year contracts, arguably, but the bankers are more comfortable with 20-year contract. And then the decision-making on the construction and on the pipeline needs to be matched with that demand. And it's true that managing the whole thing is a complex endeavor. You could argue that governments should do it. We don't agree with that. That's industry should do that. And we are very strong believers in consortiums. This is exactly what we've done in Spain. And what we think that the success recipe for here should be the same. It should be a group of large off-takers. I mentioned ThyssenKrupp obviously as a perfect candidate. In Germany, you have BASF, you have RWE, and many others. And then you need to bring together the production. The developers are here. We don't need to. 100 gigawatts is already a good starting point. Morocco is also moving quite fast in the same direction with developers of like NVIDIA Power. And what we need, indeed, is having all these people work together. No, you're answering your question, who owns it? Who owns, for instance, we've worked with Enagas, Snam, and Fluxys, the three pipeline companies which own the TAP, Trans-Adriatic Pipeline, which was built, brings Azerbaijani gas to Europe, very much prized right now. It was a pipeline developed and built by those three TSOs and bankers. Nord Stream 2, good or bad example. You had Gazprom, but also Wintershall, NG, and some others. So you can have a bunch of players who are either upstream, midstream, or downstream players who come together and yes, build some form of project financing. Ultimately, it's project financing. And these infrastructures arguably could be said to be regulated at one point or another. They're unique, they're monopolies, they're virtual, monopolies. I think ultimately these things will be regulated. The first thing that Enagas, for instance, is showing in Spain is that yes, it can have government money, yes, it can have subsidies, or it can invest its own capital, but it wants customer contracts, our so-called HTSA, hydrogen transmission and storage agreements, on which they can back project finance. So yes, pipelines in the US, how they're built, thousands, hundreds of thousands of kilometers of pipelines have been built in the US based on that model. You have an offtake contract, and then it's built. It's the way oil and gas infrastructure. Let's think about it. Hydrogen is like oil.
Just to comment. So it's easier to bring the hydrogen to ThyssenKrupp, to BASF, and so on. But we have a discussion in Germany now how to bring the hydrogen also to the smaller customers, to the smaller plants, and that is not that easy. So we have planning an update, or we are working on an update of the hydrogen strategy in Germany, and we are discussing about the role of the state for like not state-owned, but maybe state-run or whatever hydrogen pipeline net. So that is a very interesting question, and we have some political discussions, as you can imagine, about that point. So that is the one comment, and the other one is about the hydrogen electrolyzer capacity. The worldwide capacity, besides of China at the moment, is around 3 to 5 gigawatt last year. If you look on the plans of the European Union to produce or import 10 million and produce 10 million tons of hydrogen in 2030, that means a capacity of 200 gigawatt in 2030. So that shows a little bit, only for Europe, how far the way is for the ramping up of electrolyzer production. So that's why I said we need all technologies, we need all companies, we need a lot of, also here we need a lot of state funding then. The European Union is planning some funding schemes, also the federal government in Germany. So, but that is really the bottleneck, I think, of the hydrogen economy.
Thank you, and we are out of time for audience questions. But before we close, I have one final question for the panel and one question for the audience. If there was a coalition working on a pipeline from Mauritania to Europe, what organizations immediately know they would be really interested in being involved, somewhat interested, or not interested? Can I see a show of hands just out of curiosity? All right, some level of interest. Thank you, Jonas. And my final question for the panel, if you could ask one thing of one group, what would it be, and who is the group? So do you want something from a financier? Do you want something from a government? What is the one thing you want in order to accelerate hydrogen deployment from your perspective? Who would like to go first?
Thank you very much, Thomas, for this question. On our side, definitely, at least for now, since we are at a very early development stage for all those, let's say, large hydrogen projects, the ask would be to governments. We believe at EMEA Power that we need really clear strategy of hydrogen, green ammonia deployment with an implementation roadmap. This is an important thing for all, let's say, the countries that have the resources. We are here, for example, in, we discussed also about the hydrogen code this morning. It's very important to give the visibility to all the players on what the governments are doing, what they want to do, how they want to do things, how land will be allocated, what incentives can be provided. All those things are very important to promote somehow the development of those projects.
Now I have a message. Africa to the Africans. I mean, the idea that there is an immense resource that is going to be lots of fun for multinational companies, it's an idea that has been practiced for a long period of time, and I don't think it's a good idea to do it here. We want Africa to be transformed by hydrogen. Not just a few people, 1 billion people or more in Africa. How you do it? The first thing that you have to recognize that it's going to be built by Africans. So it's African entrepreneurs, and there are many in the room. I'd like to commend them because they're making it happen, and it should be entrepreneurship to start with. But it's not enough. You need, yes, I'm very fond of capitalism, but I'm going to say something. You need public ownership. You need. And at one point there was a mention of the Norwegian model. Norwegian model was not just pure capitalism. There's a company called now Equinor, which was built with 100% ownership by the Norwegian government, and which turned Norway into the oil and gas superpower, which it is today. My message to Mauritania is that think Equinor. Build your own Equinor, and your own Equinor will be based on including land ownership. And land ownership means money. And when we're saying, how do you finance that? And we've discussed, I personally discussed it with Mrs. Saleh, and say, you have the idea of giving your resources away to multinational companies and getting the debt on your sovereign debt that people want to offer you, the kind offer that you have from the world of bankers who will 5 years later come and restructure your excess debt. Don't listen to them and build this thing on your side. So then again, building, I would say, a strong, with a powerful governance, a strong Mauritanian hydrogen company is going to be a key for success. It's not just, I'm just saying that because it's up for Mauritania to gain, but in the end, what you want is stability. It's how do you reduce risk? You know how do you reduce risk? Because people are happy and they don't rebel. And if people are happy because their life standard of living is going through the roof, because they have access to power, they have access to health, people don't rebel. I mean, there's be no revolution in Abu Dhabi, you know, everybody's happy there. So let's, and I think there is a vision in this country to say we are the new, the future, Abu Dhabi or UAE.
And one of the things that needs to be built is this proper governance. So another message to all the industry players that we are, let's go for it. Let's help Mauritania, not just to build a pipeline, but to build something which will be there in 50 years or 100 years' time, and will be the pride of Mauritania and Africa.
Yes, somebody talked before about value-added development in Africa. And now I come back to my former position as a commissioner of the federal government. When we started to commission with Pascal to analyze a study about the potential of hydrogen production in Western Africa 2 years ago, H2 Atlas, you can find it on the website, we detected a potential of 165,000 terawatt hours of green hydrogen production in Western African countries. So then we started a master degree program for the 15 ECOWAS countries for 60 students, a 2 years master program started last year in Niger, to build a workforce, to build hydrogen ambassadors for the African continent, to give this country chances, to give added value development. And that is what is very important, I think. And but there's a sort of a competition if you look the development in African countries and the need and production of hydrogen for the local, for the domestic economy, and then the investment from outside to produce hydrogen for the export to Europe, for example. And I think there's a sort of a competition, and every country has to solve it a little bit for itself. But when we started with from the federal government side, our idea was to give this continent really chances with hydrogen economy, with a global hydrogen economy.
Thank you. And before we end, was there one final question from the audience? All right, I guess not. In that case, thank you all so much for your time. Let's give a big round of applause to our panelists. And I believe we're passing back to Green Hydrogen Organization to close us out.
Thank you, TJ, and thank you for this great panel. What a great note to end the panel sessions on. So I have 3 very quick messages. One is about what happens now. So for those of you who want to stay on and participate in the working session on basically developing the Nouakchott messages from this forum, we'll go upstairs. There'll be some coffee, and then we'll have a working session for about an hour. This is, of course, the message that the Minister of Economy will be conveying on Saturday at the roundtable at the margins of the IMF and World Bank spring meetings in Washington. It will touch on the role of development finance institutions, as was presented and drawing from the report that was launched today. But I think that we've heard quite a lot today, not only about the role of DFIs, but also about, obviously, the private sector, private finance, governments, both governments that need to decarbonize their hard-to-abate sectors and that will need to import a lot of green hydrogen, and their role in sending price signals, and also host governments in terms of their participation in green hydrogen projects. So there's a lot of, I think, things that we can draw on that was said today and discussed today, and we look forward to trying to bring that together with as many of you as possible upstairs. So that's what happens now. The second message is about what happens this evening. So our hosts here, the Ministry of Petroleum, Energy and Mines, are hosting a reception. It starts at 7:30 at Nouakchott Nights. The dress code is casual. And if you have any questions about that, please talk to Joyce or our colleagues in the ministry. And yes, third message is about what happens tomorrow. We will reconvene here at 9:30 and kick off a discussion around designing appropriate fiscal terms for green hydrogen projects, and also learn from what is happening here in Mauritania in developing the hydrogen code, and also what is happening in other AGA member countries when it comes to legislation and fiscal regimes, including from Egypt. So we look forward to that. So yeah, we hope to see many of you upstairs, and those that will not join us for that session, either at the reception or tomorrow morning. So thank you, everyone, and great applause to all our speakers and panelists.